121. The Kidnapping Incident and the Ministry of Magic's Children's Adventure. Early that morning, Yuma summoned Severus and Lupin. He first led them into his office and outlined what the French aurors had so far. We discovered Nicholas Flamel's disappearance at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on August 2nd, he began. The house elf, who has served the Flamel household for years, came to us in a panic and said that the two masters had left early that morning and never returned, something that had never happened before. Normally, whatever plans they had, they always told the house elf when they would be back so it could prepare. This time, Mr. Flamel told the house elf before leaving that he would attend an engagement and be back after lunch, by 2 o'clock at the latest. The house elf waited until 4 and still had seen no sign of them. The house elf went straight to the ministry and begged us to find them. We then traced the Flamels' movements. From their friend, Madame Maxime, the headmistress of Beauxbatons, we learned that the Flamels had attended a French Alchemy Association meeting that morning. Though they had long resigned as president, they remained important figures there. According to the association's wizards, the Flamels were present for only 2 hours. Then, as if they had received news, they left in a hurry, and no one could say where they went afterward. Yuma handed Severus and Lupin copies of the statements the ministry had collected, the house elf's testimony, and the accounts from the association. On the evening of the 2nd, while we kept guards at the Flamel residence, we sent 4 auror teams to check the homes of the Flamel's friends and places they frequented. At a small monastery on the edge of Paris where a wizard is stationed, we found further leads. The clue came from a sister at the monastery, Sister Aimée. The monastery, sponsored by the Flamels, does charity work. It takes in Muggle orphans and helps the elderly and widows. Sister Aimée is a witch who has been close to the Flamels ever since she moved here from a church in Sweden 8 years ago. After we contacted her, she told us that around 1 o'clock on the 2nd, she had seen the couple in the 16th arrondissement. They looked unwell. When she greeted them, they didn't seem to notice. Only then did she realize they were flanked by 2 men in plain Muggle clothing. Our aurors sketched the 2 men from her description. He produced 2 charcoal portraits. Severus glanced at them. One of the men, with some Arabic features, looked familiar. Since I've been in Britain for so long, I'm not fully familiar with your Ethics Review Committee procedures, Severus said. For something this critical, did you ask the sister to provide her memory? Yuma nodded and inhaled sharply. We submitted an application to the Wizard Ethics Review Committee immediately. Once it was approved, we consulted with Sister Aimée. Clergy who are also witches tend to be cautious about such things, but as a friend of the Flamels, she agreed, selflessly, to have that afternoon's memory extracted and submitted. The original memory sample is archived, and almost all the aurors working this case have viewed it. Sister Aimée did indeed see the Flamels in the 16th arrondissement, and we refined the portraits of the 2 men to match a 1-to-1 restoration. We have now issued warrants for the 2 men in the portraits. With help from the Muggle police, we canvassed the area that evening and identified an apartment. Yuma set a photograph on the desk. It showed a young married couple, faces neither Severus nor Lupin found entirely unfamiliar. Patrick Rosier and Mary Rosier, he said. They married a year ago. Mary is a Muggle, and Patrick is a squib from the Rosier family. Though Harry had agreed confidently when Draco invited him out, once they walked through the ministry doors, he felt a tightness in his chest. Draco had accompanied Lucius to countless wizardly events and was used to pomp and ceremony. Harry, by contrast, had met danger rather than formal power since leaving home with Severus. He'd become involved in rescuing a kidnapped Muggle girl, a vampire, and a wizard. He'd been captured by a pack of werewolves and later escaped with Lupin and other children. Those events had been traumatic but intimate, moments when he'd stood up in front of werewolves, expecting to be bitten, and declared himself Severus Snape's ward. The British ministry had felt less imposing because Kingsley always received them and Severus stood by his side. It had not felt like a place set apart. Now, alone in a foreign ministry that governed every aspect of wizarding life, he felt the weight of authority and politics. Wizards hurried down corridors clutching folders whose contents could determine the fates of people and groups. Small black cats darted between people's legs, carrying interdepartmental documents in their mouths and slipping through the crowd as if they could pass through solid objects. Draco watched the bustling, organized chaos with wide eyes, wizards with conflicting agendas moving together like the calibrated gears of a vast machine, and for the first time, the boys truly appreciated the inscrutable machinery of power. Harry drew in a steadying breath and glanced at Draco. Draco swallowed and met his eyes. Harry spoke first, voice small. "How about we just wander around the Auror headquarters area today?" Draco folded his arms and, half mocking, half defiant, responded, "If that's what you want, I'll respect your feelings." They had barely walked 10 meters from the Auror office when they sheepishly found themselves lingering nearer the center again. The French Aurors were busy, but having eaten and slept there the night before made the ministry feel more like a temporary home than an alien place. The two boys kept to the edges, trying not to draw attention, wandering until they slipped into a corridor lined with doors that looked like dormitories but were mostly unoccupied. Draco scowled. "These Frenchmen are liars," he said. "Look, plenty of empty rooms, yet they told us to cram together." "They didn't lie," Harry said through the small window set into a door. He could see enough to know these rooms weren't dormitories. "This is probably where they hold suspects." "How do you know?" Draco shot back, affronted. "Because I almost ended up in a detention room at the British ministry once," Harry muttered. "Let's go. We shouldn't be wandering here." Draco sneered at what he took for cowardice. "What are you afraid of? Didn't that Frenchman say we can go anywhere so long as there's no 'Do Not Enter' sign?" He swaggered forward as if daring the corridor itself. They came upon a young female Auror idly picking at her nails outside one of the doors. She looked suspicious when she saw them, then relaxed when she noticed the French ministry badges on their chests and asked nothing. Draco peered through the half-open door. Inside, a young man sat on a hard cot, knees hugged to his chest, his eyes red and tear-streaked. At once Draco brightened. "There, see him? That's the Rosier we met on the ship. Snape said he's a squib from the Rosier family." Harry didn't understand the excitement. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Because this is a detention room," Draco announced smugly. "If he's here, he committed a crime, and the French Aurors arrested him." Draco hadn't been present for the late-night discussion between Severus and Yuma. Harry had heard it, but the name Rosier hadn't registered with him until now. Yet Draco inflated the moment with his family pride and outrage. "Our pure-blood names are inviolable," he declared. "If some ordinary squib impersonates a Rosier, it's an insult to our honor. Of course the Aurors would arrest him." Harry looked at him for a long moment and then stepped up to the witch on guard. "Ma'am," he said politely, "may we speak with the gentleman inside?" The French witch heard Harry's words. Her English was halting. After a moment's daze, she gathered herself and sized the two boys up. "Are you the ones Mr. Yuma brought back yesterday?" she asked, her pronunciation rough but intelligible. Harry nodded. "Yes, Mr. Yuma brought us to the French Ministry of Magic. We met the gentleman being held here yesterday. We have some questions for him. May we speak with him?" The witch hesitated. The two looked far too young, but she had heard the gossip from the night before. Yuma's team, while at Nicholas Flamel's house, had reportedly been routed by two British wizards, and everyone had been talking. Gerard had eventually calmed things by saying the British wizard was a Hogwarts dean, and no shame attached to losing to him and his companion. The badges on the boys' chests made it clear they were the students brought back by that dean. Faced with the eager, expectant looks of Harry and Draco, the witch finally nodded. "He's not exactly under suspicion. His home is sealed for now, so he's being held here. If you know him, go ahead." Relief and excitement washed over Harry and Draco. They stepped into the holding room. The young man, Rosier, sat on the bed, knees pulled up, and looked at them with a bewildered, guarded expression. He had no idea what further cooperation the Aurors expected of him. Draco couldn't wait. He launched into his question. "Speak, were you?" Before he could finish, Harry clapped a hand over his mouth. Draco fought and wrenched free, only to find Harry apologizing. "Sorry, he doesn't always start conversations well," Harry said with a sheepish smile. I'm Dudley Dursley, and he's Draco Malfoy. Rosier stared blankly. The names meant nothing to him. My teacher met you yesterday, at Dover Port. Do you remember? He wore a black trench coat, his hair tied in a short ponytail. Harry's simple description jogged Rosier's memory. You were that gentleman's students? He asked, surprised. Yes, Harry said. We want to know how you ended up here. Did you make a mistake? Draco, still scowling at Harry for the interruption, turned his glare on Rosier. At the question, Rosier's expression crumpled. He put his hands over his face and began to sob. They say I'm involved in the kidnapping of Nicholas Flamel. Back at Yuma's office, the black-clad Auror had been explaining the case. We initially suspected the Rosier couple because Muggles reported seeing two men in front of the Rosier apartment in the 16th arrondissement that afternoon, Yuma said gravely. Witnesses said the men brought someone, Nicholas Flamel, into the Rosier flat. Yesterday we locked down that Muggle apartment and interviewed everyone, he continued. We looked into the Rosier couple and found Patrick Rosier. He's a squib from the Rosier family. We contacted his parents. They denied having a son, Yuma said, anger and disbelief flickering across his face. They were insulted by the suggestion, even by the implication that their family could be shamed. He rubbed his forehead. Then we checked Patrick's Muggle work history. His sales manager at the car dealership had been confunded and gave Patrick an unexplained 5-day vacation. We also found he and his wife took a self-drive trip to Edinburgh and were due back yesterday morning, so we intercepted them at Calais and brought them to the ministry for questioning. It was during that time we learned about you two, Yuma added. Based on your route, we suspected you might head to Flamel's home and staked it out. That led to what happened later. Severus and Lupin flipped through the dossier of evidence compiled by the French Aurors and paused on the section about Patrick Rosier. You couldn't get anything from this squib? Severus asked. Yuma shook his head. We thought even if Patrick wasn't central, he might have been forced into helping. But in detailed interrogation, we found he and his wife knew nothing. Patrick was badly affected by the confundo. During the days he spent in Britain, a lot of things happened in his home that he simply has no memory of. Severus produced a photo taken inside the Rosier flat. What about the apartment? He asked. Yuma gestured toward the picture. All the furniture was gone. The room was emptied. What remained were alchemical symbols and runes. The ministry's alchemy department checked and said the traces matched the hand of Mr. LeMay, very distinctive techniques. And the philosopher's stone? Lupin asked. Was it taken with Flamel, or is it still in the house? Yuma could only shake his head. We can't tell whether the stone is missing. Only Flamel knows where it was hidden. Even their house elf was unaware of its location. So you still can't rule out that the kidnappers sought the philosopher's stone, Severus said. That's possible, Yuma answered quietly. But the alchemical traces make us suspect they weren't just after the stone. They might have been trying to get the knowledge Flamel used to create it. Steal knowledge, Severus muttered, glancing at the two portraits of the culprits the Aurors had circulated. These fellows look like fighters, not scholars. He was half jesting, but he also remembered an image. One of these men looks familiar. Ghost Snape, whose portrait hung nearby, could see the photo as well and gave a dry chuckle. Distinctly Arabian features. He has put on weight and lost some hair, but it's him. Thomas Shafiq. He originated from Egypt. Severus did not hide it. He set the photo of the short, heavy-set man with the Arab features in front of Yuma. This is someone I once knew. Yuma's stunned look shifted to excited disbelief. You know him? Thomas Shafiq, Severus said, a Death Eater who followed you-know-who. Not a corps lieutenant, mostly active in Eastern Europe, acting as liaison for groups pushing pure-blood ideology. After you-know-who fell, he disappeared. Many thought he fled to the Middle East. Yuma stood up so suddenly his chair scraped, but now he's turned up in France and may have taken part in Flamel's kidnapping. The British Aurors were right. Events here and in Britain are connected. Death Eaters who weren't rounded up may have re-established ties. Prison breaks, kidnappings, hijackings, maybe they're preparing something bigger. We must report this to Gerard at once, Yuma said. Find out everything on Thomas Shafiq. Compare him to this portrait. If it's him, we'll form a joint task force with the British Aurors. He left the room to pass the news along, brimming with urgency. Severus, however, remained thoughtful and far less eager. Stroking his chin, he told Lupin, "I don't think either the British or the French aurors are entirely correct. I doubt the Death Eaters could reconnect so quickly. You-know-who has been gone a very long time. Those in hiding would not dare provoke the ministries of more than one country until they were sure of support." Lupin, lacking Severus's depth of knowledge, asked plainly, "If the kidnappers here have nothing to do with Barty's group, who could they be?" Severus said nothing at first. He went over the materials Yuma had given them again, reading through the statement from Mother Amy for the third time. Finally, he looked up. "We can't just sit here and theorize. To understand what's really happened, we need to go to the scene ourselves and speak to the witnesses." 123. You liar. Pure-blooded wizards are clearly all dating. You liar. Pure-blooded wizards are clearly all dating. Chapter 122. You liar. Pure-blood wizards are clearly loving and harmonious. Kidnap Nicholas Flamel? Draco scrutinized Rosier with a look of doubt. "Do you have a wand?" Rosier lowered his hands from his face and gave a bitter smile. "How could a squib have a wand? Then how could you possibly kidnap a great alchemist?" "The aurors asked me the same thing." Rosier clutched his hair. "They said someone had cast confundus on me and that parts of my memory had been tampered with. The wizards who kidnapped Nicholas Flamel locked the couple in my house after they took them, right during the days I was in Britain with my wife." Harry looked at him with pity and couldn't help asking, "Your surname is Rosier. There must be a very powerful family behind you, right? Didn't your parents or relatives come to speak for you?" At that question, Rosier actually grew calm. He raised an arm to wipe the tears from his face. "You're still young and haven't dealt with the magical world much. Pure-blood families, especially ones like the Rosiers, have extremely strict expectations. According to the great pure-blood theory, a squib simply shouldn't exist in a pure-blood family. Once they're discovered, they're kicked out, and the family refuses to acknowledge them." Draco went pale, disbelief written all over his face. He stared at Rosier, speechless. Only Harry managed, with a gasp, "Kicked out by your own biological parents?" Rosier nodded, eyes distant. "It was probably not long after my 10th birthday. My parents were certain they couldn't see any signs of magic in me, and eventually, along with everyone else, they accepted that I really was a squib. I was terrified. By then, I already knew what the consequences would be for a squib in a family like that. Almost every morning, I woke up and first checked, trembling, to make sure I was still in my own bed. I feared my mother and father would quietly throw me out in the middle of the night. I begged them many times to accept me. Even if I couldn't be a wizard, as long as they didn't kick me out, I'd do anything. Work in the house, whatever. But they only insulted me, saying I wasn't even as useful as a house elf, and that keeping me would bring them shame. So, a week before my 11th birthday, when admission letters for Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic had already gone out to the other children, I had nothing. They finally lost patience. My biological parents threw me out of the house in Nice, near the Italian border, and cast a spell on the door so that I could never find it or open it again. Draco slumped against the wall, eyes wide, gray face full of disbelief. Harry listened with his mouth agape. The worst scenario he'd imagined was living like he did at Aunt Petunia's, suffering and humiliation, but he'd never believed a child's own parents could throw them away. Rosier, by contrast, was calm, as if those years had left him numb. He no longer seemed hurt or angry. I wandered alone in Nice for a week. I knew nothing about the Muggle world, didn't recognize cars, didn't know what a subway was, didn't understand police, and I didn't even know what normal people wore. It was only thanks to the kindness of the people in Nice that I had food. Back at home, almost everyone in the Rosier family had been taught that Muggles were stupid, lowly, and filthy. Having been raised that way, I had always felt repulsed by and superior to Muggles. But after my noble parents abandoned me, it was ordinary Muggles who helped me. They didn't let me starve. They took me to a relief station and gave me a place to sleep. Rosier's voice tightened with feeling. Someone even tried to call the police to find my parents, but I knew there was no chance they'd send me home. I couldn't tell them where my house was or who my parents were. In the end, they could only send me to an orphanage. The church orphanage near Paris was run by two kind elderly sisters. The time I spent there was lovely. The sisters were all very kind. Children bickered sometimes, but under the adults' guidance, there was no serious bullying. Later, when I became an adult, it was the sisters who helped find me work. I became a car salesman in Paris, and that's where I met my wife, Mary. She was beautiful and full of life. I loved her. She was willing to build a family with me, to give me a home again. But I was afraid of getting her into trouble, so I never told her anything about magic or my past. When the ministry's aurors took us in yesterday, she was terrified. We were separated and not allowed any contact. I'm very worried about her. Terrified, really. Liar, Draco suddenly shouted, glaring. You're lying. Your surname isn't Rosier at all. How could a squib appear in a pure-blood house? We are born noble and would never abandon our own. You're deliberately trying to smear pure-blood wizards. With that shout, he stormed out, leaving Harry to offer an apologetic look to the stunned Rosier. I'm very sorry, sir. He's a bit sensitive about these things. Rosier shook his head. He understood why Draco had reacted so strongly. It's all right. That's how people are raised in families like that. If I hadn't been a squib and hadn't experienced it myself, I suppose I would have been just like him, refusing to understand. He turned to Harry and earnestly asked a favor. The aurors said they've mostly determined I'm innocent, but for now, I still can't leave this room. Could you find out where they've placed my wife, Mary? I'm so worried about her, and I'm afraid that once she learns the truth, she may never forgive me for keeping it from her. If you can, please apologize to her on my behalf. Harry, who had always prided himself on doing the right thing, instinctively patted his chest and promised, I'll be very happy to help you with that. 124. Alchemy Ritual. At 10 a.m., Severus and Lupin followed Yuma and left the French Ministry of Magic. The weather in Paris was pleasantly mild. They apparated directly from the Auror headquarters hearth to the apartment building where the Rosier family lived. After the incident had been reported, Aurors had sealed the apartment off under the pretense of Muggle police authority. The young couple could not return home for the time being. Yuma led them into the room where the eyewitnesses had last seen the Lemay couple being taken. I've already reported your findings to Gerard, Yuma said to Severus. She'll find a way to verify whether the man in the portrait is really Shafiq. From now on, I'm assigned to work under you. Whatever you need, whether it's following a lead or arranging a meeting, I can set it up. Severus's delivery of crucial information on his first day had earned him even more favor with Gerard. Now Yuma was his full-time assistant, so Severus could focus entirely on the case. Let's examine the scene first, Severus said. At some point, a pipe had appeared in Severus's hand, and his holly wand had transformed into a walking stick. The sudden change left Yuma a little surprised. Lupin, who had grown up on stories of Sherlock Holmes, covered his forehead with one hand. The science of deduction, Watson, he blurted out, almost involuntarily. Are you calling me Watson? Lupin asked. Dudley doesn't like being Watson, and he doesn't like being called Conan either, Severus shrugged. I thought perhaps you might like it. I probably won't, Lupin replied dryly as he followed him into the room. Two aurors stood guard inside. When they saw Severus and the others enter, they rose quickly. Just as they were about to speak to Yuma, the dark-skinned wizard waved them off. Their presence was no longer required, and they could wait outside. Once the two aurors had left, Severus held the pipe between his teeth and began to systematically examine the room. As Yuma had said, most of the furniture and appliances had been cleared out. The small apartment looked empty. The floor was strewn with papers and scraps of cloth. The papers filled with what looked like fashion sketches, Mrs. Rosier's work. She designed custom clothing. The apartment had 2 bedrooms. The other rooms were unremarkable, but in the center of the living room floor, some alchemical symbols and runes remained. Severus crouched to inspect the blurred marks that hadn't been entirely erased. No wonder you suspect the kidnapper's goal isn't just the Philosopher's Stone, but the knowledge of how to create it, he said. These glyphs look like original passages from the Book of Abraham. The Book of Abraham? Lupin frowned. Your earned degrees haven't made you an expert in everything you read at school, Watson, Severus said. After touching the symbols, clearly written in dragon's blood, he stood again. It was only after obtaining the Book of Abraham in his youth that Nicholas Flamel understood alchemy's highest mysteries, created the Philosopher's Stone, and achieved great wealth and longevity. Parts of the original text were once public, he continued. The illustrations and words weren't written but were branded and impressed into metal, then colors were applied to the impressions. There are 21 pages, numbered as 3 sets of 7. The images that circulated are always evasive. It's hard to imagine how the Flamel of the past became a master alchemist from those fragments. Lupin looked bewildered. I never saw that book in the Hogwarts library. Of course not. It's a restricted section forbidden book. Did you find it after you became head? Lupin asked. I happened to find it in 5th year when I broke into the restricted section looking for books to aid in spellcraft, Severus said casually. Lupin was speechless. Yuma stood by the door, silent unless Severus addressed him. If Severus wanted him to speak, he would happily provide information. After all, could a wizard's work really be called stealing? These runes can be a clue, but they shouldn't be taken at face value, Severus judged. Given how much time the kidnappers had after taking the lamaze, they could have cleaned up every trace. The fact they left any marks suggests they wanted to mislead the investigation. He walked through the 2 empty bedrooms again, checking for anything the Aurors might have missed. Yuma followed him. We know the symbols on the floor can't be fully trusted, but they cleaned too well, Yuma said. Yesterday we brought in alchemy experts and many specialists from the Alchemists Association to sweep the place. They were looking for residual 32. They searched 3 times and found nothing, not even traces of apparition. It's as if, after the 2 men brought the Lemay couple here, they vanished into thin air. Severus rested his chin on his hand and looked out the bedroom window. From there one could see much of the 16th arrondissement, though a good view didn't make it a nicer place. Is this building the tallest among the surrounding structures? He asked suddenly. Yuma fumbled through a messy folder and found the document with the answer. Yes. Muggles consider it a historic apartment building, the oldest in the district. It even has fireplaces. It's a Haussmann-style building built in 1934. Including the roof structure, it's about 42 meters tall. 42 meters, Severus repeated. He opened the bedroom window and leaned out, looking left and right. Are we in the middle unit on the top floor? Yes, this is the smallest room in the apartment, and because it's top floor, it's the cheapest. Severus nodded. That fits Rosier's finances. Yuma looked at him expectantly. Have you figured something else out, Mr. Snape? Let's go down first, Severus said. Don't be impatient, Yuma. Leave this room and take a look from street level. He led the way down the stairwell. Yuma and Lupin followed, puzzled about what he intended to see on the first floor. Once outside, Severus crossed the street and stopped to look back at the building. Only from the curb did Yuma and Lupin appreciate how large the structure was, the largest in the 16th arrondissement. Its gray, weathered stone facade, heavy with history, rose like a fortress wall, blocking the light and casting an oppressive shadow. Auror investigations cannot be limited to just wizarding procedures, and 32, Severus said, narrowing his eyes. Sometimes you need to step beyond the constraints of your thinking. He stared at the building. This building is unusual. The gang that kidnapped the Lemais didn't necessarily take them because of Rosier's identity. They may have targeted the location itself. His status as a squib from a 3 could be a convenient coincidence. Lupin absorbed the implication. Although not an alchemist himself, his childhood reading had taught him enough. They were interested in this building and the Rosier apartment's position within it, and brought the Lemais here. An alchemy ritual, Yuma murmured. Severus had hinted at that possibility. If Yuma couldn't see it, he wouldn't be of much help. They wanted to use that room to perform some kind of alchemical rite. He brightened at the idea, then quickly sobered. No. Yesterday we brought in departmental alchemy experts and many professionals from the Alchemists Association. They examined the room and found no signs of any activated ritual. Severus slowly removed the pipe from his mouth. Then we need more clues to prove it. Meanwhile, at the French Ministry of Magic, Harry finally found Draco in the Auror headquarters restrooms. The young Malfoy was still furious, insisting, "That liar is despicable. He's told so many lies, he's even convinced himself. You don't believe the nonsense he said, do you?" Harry had kept Severus's advice, treat him like a child, younger and more immature than you, in mind, and he understood what Rosier meant. If Rosier hadn't been a squib abandoned by his father, with that family's upbringing, he might have been no different than Draco, uncritical of anything tied to pure-blood privilege. Under Draco's intense stare, Harry chose his words carefully. "Of course I don't assume everything he said is true. We only heard him speak. We don't have evidence." Draco's expression brightened. The peer who had once beaten him for his mother wasn't so disagreeable at the moment. "We also don't have evidence that he's lying," Harry added, and Draco's face soured again. "There has to be a way to prove he's full of lies." "Why don't we speak to his wife?" Harry suggested, pleased with himself for the timely idea. Had he told Draco outright to see Rosier's Muggle wife, Draco's contempt for Muggles might have prevented him from going. If he's a liar, his wife will know him better than anyone and won't be fooled. Draco took the bait. "Do you know where she's being kept?" "In a room down the corridor we passed earlier," Harry said. He had already asked the witch guarding Rosier's door when they came through. "She's being held there and is not allowed to move freely in the Ministry because she's a Muggle." "Then let's go." Draco smoothed his collar and regained his aristocratic composure. "Lead the way, Potter." Harry had learned how to flatter Draco, stroke the young noble the right way, and he'd be easy to sway. Draco was pleased with Harry's deference. "When we return to Britain, you can be my lackey." Harry said nothing, following behind and making a face at the back of Draco's head. They returned to the corridor and found the levem where Mrs. Rosier was being kept. There was no guard at the door, and it remained closed, but after Harry pleaded for a while with the witch on duty, she relented and allowed them a 20-minute visit. "The Ministry not letting her out is actually for her protection," the witch said as she opened the door. "Some Muggles simply cannot accept 32 and wizards. People who are mentally fragile can break down completely when they learn such things exist." 125. Not much romance, right? Can't buy leader romance, right? Chapter 124. Not much romance, is there? Extra release for Alliance Masters, right? At this point, I'd like readers to jot down our domain. Read Taiwanese novels at Taiwanese novel site, super hassle-free. When Harry finally met Madame Rosier, she did indeed look haggard. Although the Aurors had placed her under house arrest and barred her from leaving, her basic living conditions were much like Harry's. A house elf handled everything, meals, drinks, cleaning, so she needn't lift a finger. At the sight of the two children entering, Marie Rosier froze. She rose awkwardly from her chair. Is there something else you need to ask me? Something I should cooperate with?" This time Harry had experience. He spoke before Draco could. "Patrick asked us to come and check on you." At the mention of her husband's name, Marie flared. She hurried to Harry and seized both his arms. "They haven't hurt him, have they? Those people said he's a wizard's child, that he took part in some kidnapping. That's impossible. He's been traveling with me these past few days. We haven't done anything." As Marie stepped forward, Draco instinctively backed away, keeping a cautious distance from the Muggle, watching as if from outside a zoo cage. Harry winced at her grip and finally wrenched free with effort. "He's fine. The Aurors cleared part of it up. He had nothing to do with the kidnapping. You two were just caught up in it by accident." Harry had learned adults weren't always impressive. The first time Sanguini had abducted him, he'd had to comfort the vampire. Now in France, he had to comfort a married woman. Sometimes these grown-ups were less reliable than he was. Then why are we still being kept apart? Marie stared at him, utterly unmoored in this unfamiliar situation. "Because the investigation isn't finished. There are still a few loose ends, so you'll have to stay here for now." After the explanation, Harry continued. "Patrick asked me to apologize for him. He says he never meant to hide the wizarding world and magic from you." Draco shot Harry a furious glare. He wasn't stupid. He realized he'd been tricked into coming. But he kept his anger in check, actually eager to hear Marie's reply. It would be better if this muggle erupted, shouting, "He's a liar! Never a word of truth from him. I'm through with him." When she heard Harry's words, Marie's eyes went wide. So, what those people said is true. Patrick really is a wizard's child? Harry preferred to believe the story Patrick had told him. He sympathized with the young man abandoned by his family, so he explained patiently. He's the child of wizards, but he has no magical gift. He can't use magic. Because of that, his extremist parents cast him out when he was small, and he ended up an orphan. He didn't want to tell you because wizarding law is strict. He worried that knowing would bring you trouble. That was too much for Draco. This was cheating. It might all be lies. He could be deceiving you with that story, just like he already deceived you about who he is, right? His complete disregard for the woman's feelings, rubbing salt in the wound, irritated Harry. Sometimes he indulged Draco, provided he was in a good mood himself. Right now he wasn't. This pampered prince was asking for a punch. How can you say that? I'm not wrong. Before the two could start shouting, Marie shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks as she spoke in a choked voice. He never lied to me. Patrick never lied. He never spoke about his parents. He only said he grew up in an orphanage, that he'd had no family since childhood. But I could tell he kept it from me not just to protect me, but because he didn't want me to know his past and feel sorry for him. Both Harry and Draco turned to her. Even Harry, who had seen the bond between Sanguini and Patrick, couldn't help asking, "You're that sure he cares so much about you?" "He loves me. From the very start, he told me I'm his only family, past, present, and future. His home is wherever I am." Marie pulled a tissue and dabbed her eyes. "And I love him, so I could sense he was hiding something that hurt him deeply, yet he never let that pain reach me." Draco's face twitched. He didn't know what expression to wear. Harry had already lost interest in bickering with the Malfoy heir. He sat opposite Marie, resting his chin on his hand. "Were you two on the run from the police? Or was it some mishap after the werewolf caught you?" "Nothing like that." Marie didn't understand how a child could imagine such outlandish scenarios. She murmured, "We met while apartment hunting. We both wanted the same cheap flat. The orphanage had referred him, so he got a better rate and first priority. I just found a job and had no money left for anything else. I approached him. The place had 2 bedrooms, so we could split the rent, 1 room each. He agreed at once. I thought he'd charge me the full price, but he only asked for half the discounted rent he paid, and every month he passed my half on to the orphanage that had raised him. From then on, I knew he was different. 2 months later, living under the same roof, he asked me out. 2 years after that, we married in the orphanage that had brought him up." Marie sniffed, smiling sheepishly. "A very ordinary meeting. Hardly romantic, right?" Draco muttered under his breath, loud enough for only himself. "Stupid muggle." Harry shook his head earnestly. "No, Mrs. Rosier, your story is wonderful. My teacher says this is how most people's lives should be." A genuine smile brightened Marie's face. "So I don't care about Patrick's past. I just want a life with him in our own home. Magic, wizards, whatever hurt him before. I can leave all that behind. You'll build a beautiful life together," Harry said with all his heart. On the outskirts of Paris stood an unremarkable convent in the northwest of the great city. Nicolas Flamel and his wife had always funded good causes: Beauxbatons, hospitals, church orphanages. This convent was one of them. Yuma led Severus and Lupin to the convent, where the Aurors had first picked up a clue. The community was mostly nuns and reverend mothers, with more than a dozen children out in the yard. The youngest looked about 3, the oldest 14 or 15. All seemed healthy and well cared for. Spotting Yuma, the nun watching the children greeted him familiarly. "Monsieur Yuma, here for Mother Aimée again?" "Good morning, Sister Lefebvre. Yes, we still have questions we can't quite answer. Mother's out back preparing lunch. You're welcome to stay and eat with us. Thank you for the kind invitation." After brief pleasantries, Yuma led Severus and Lupin across the forecourt to the rear kitchen. 2 sisters were at work, one laundering sheets, the other washing vegetables for the midday meal. "Sorry to trouble you again, Mother Aimée." Yuma doffed his hat and bowed to the sister at the sink. Severus and Lupin studied the elderly witch beside him. French ministry records said she was Swedish, long experienced in church work. In Paris, she had befriended the Lemais, accepted their patronage, and founded this convent, part chapel, part orphanage, part refuge for the aged. Though her face bore the marks of age, Mother Aimée stood tall and straight, a woman of striking bearing. "No trouble at all, Monsieur Yuma." She dried her hands on her apron. "I fear for Nicolas and his wife. I dare not imagine if some harm has come to them." Yuma turned to introduce his companions. "These two are—" Before he could finish, Severus, pipe in mouth, stepped forward and offered his hand. "Sherlock Holmes, my associate here is Dr. John Watson." 126. A dud. Strictly speaking, Mother Amy before them was Swedish. As one of the witches most accustomed to dealing with muggles, she had long since heard and read the stories of that great British detective. She spoke fluent English as she reached out to shake Severus's hand, then Yuma's. Severus nodded. "We were originally going to see Mr. Lemay, but we never expected something like this to happen. Later, at the invitation of the French aurors, we joined the investigation, hoping to lend whatever help we can in finding that great master alchemist. Many wizards in this world want to be friends with Nick and his wife," Mother Amy said calmly. "What they don't know is that the Lemay couple have a book with a phoenix carved on the cover. It lets them contact and correspond with wizards all over the world. But they rarely use it, preferring to keep their peaceful life in Paris." Severus caught the hint behind her words, while Yuma gave a dry cough from the side. "Mother, let's talk more specifically about the case. I've told you everything I know, and I've even given the memory. What more can an old woman explain?" She sounded irritated by the slow pace of the French aurors over the past few days. "It's already the third day since they went missing. The fact that you keep bringing people to me means you haven't found anything at all." "We have made significant progress," Yuma said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We expect to identify the two men you saw following the Lemay couple by today. We're here now to look for any other clues." It was plain that Mother Amy's impatience reflected a wider frustration among French wizards. Nicolas Flamel was a symbol in France. If anything happened to him, it would be an embarrassment to the ministry and a humiliation to the French magical community. "Please, Mother, tell us what else you can." Out in the Abbey yard, Mother Amy formally accepted Severus's questioning. "You met the Lemay couple 8 years ago, when you first arrived in France?" Instead of diving straight into the crime, Severus began by establishing the older woman's background. She seemed used to the line of questioning and began her account. "It was in the spring of 1981. The magical world was in turmoil then. The influence of that Dark Lord in Britain had unsettled all of Europe. A priest-wizard in Paris wrote to me, asking me to come. The Lemay couple wanted to set up an orphanage, and he introduced me, saying I could run it. So I came and met them. They learned about my past, my faith, and my loyalty to my lord, and they decided to entrust the funding to me. That's how this place was founded." "And you kept in touch after that?" Severus asked. "Of course. They provided the initial funds and have made at least one substantial donation most years. As the one in charge, I need to make sure they know exactly where every penny goes." Mother Amy sat upright and dignified in her chair, meeting Severus's gaze without flinching. She struck him as a fair, exacting witch. Severus inclined his head. "Now then, back to the day they disappeared. On the day the Lemays went missing, what were you doing in the 16th arrondissement?" "Taking a child to the doctor," she answered. "A little girl named Sandrine had a rash. I took her to a church-run hospital there." "And then you saw the Lemay couple on Rue de Forminck?" "Yes. I was on one side of the street. They were on the other." "Did you call out to them?" "I called for Perenelle, his wife. I'm certain I was loud enough. The ministry took a memory from me that shows it. Yet they acted as if they heard nothing and hurried on." "You didn't follow them?" "I had a sick child with me," Mother Amy said, frowning. "I didn't know what was going on with them, and I had to care for the child, so I didn't think to run after them." "It wasn't until the aurors interviewed you that you realized there were two men following them?" "Yes. Those two men weren't walking right beside them. I didn't know they were tailing the couple until the aurors explained the kidnapping. Then it became clear." She looked at Severus seriously. If you want a clearer picture, you should view the memory the French ministry took from me. Since I broke my vows to give it to them, it should at least be used properly, shouldn't it? Yuma shifted uncomfortably at her words. Severus only nodded gravely. Of course. One more thing, Mother, Severus added suddenly. There's something I don't understand. If Nicholas Flamel wanted only to fund an ordinary Muggle orphanage, he wouldn't necessarily need a witch to run it, would he? His question caught Yuma by surprise. Now that Severus mentioned it, it did seem odd. Why select a witch to manage a Muggle orphanage? From Mother Amy's account, it was clear the LeMays had deliberately sought a witch. After a short silence, she answered slowly, "If telling you this helps find them, then I do not think the LeMays would object." "The children you took in weren't all ordinary Muggle orphans," she said. "There are squibs among them." "Squibs," Severus echoed. Yuma's voice rose. "That's illegal. Mother, you must understand, France has its own magical laws." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you at first," Mother Amy snapped. "I knew how you Aurors would react. You'll say squibs are not quite Muggles, that they know about wizards but cannot perform magic. But so what? Who cares for those children? Especially in families steeped in pure-blood ideology, where the birth of a squib is loathed and the children are abandoned. They live in the cracks between the wizarding and Muggle worlds. Many are never accepted by either side their whole lives. They are doomed to poverty and misery. Perenelle and her husband knew the tragic fate awaiting them. That's why they found me and asked to set up an orphanage like this. I teach them ordinary skills for the Muggle world, reading, schooling, how to work so they can have independent lives and start families. Better that than scraping by forever in a magical world that won't register them, yet passes laws to control them. Her words were fierce and passionate. For a moment, Yuma had no reply. Then, taking a deep breath, he managed a rebuttal. But if people learn there is an orphanage in Paris specifically for squibs, some will despise their children even more and insist on sending them here. That will only encourage more tragedies. Mother Amy snorted. Do you really expect people willing to abandon their children to suddenly take better care of them at home? It's better they come here where I can teach them. Yuma had no answer to that. Regardless, he said finally, this must be reported to the ministry and submitted to the Wizarding Ethics Committee for a ruling. That can wait until you rescue Perenelle and her husband, Mother Amy replied coldly. If anything truly happens to them, the children will be homeless, and they will need no committee to declare them so. All right, Severus interjected, taking his pipe from his mouth to calm the rising tension. Thank you for your time and for sharing such private matters. I promise you, on my personal honor, that we will find the LeMay couple and see that your orphanage does not fall apart. On the personal honor of the great detective Sherlock Holmes, Mother Amy quipped. Severus smiled faintly. You may not know my name, but I can give you my word on the personal honor of the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore. At that, Mother Amy looked slightly stunned. The name clearly carried weight. Severus rose from his chair and offered a final bow. Thank you for your hospitality this morning. If any other clues emerge, we will notify you immediately. Yuma set aside the argument and thanked Mother Amy before they took their leave. 127. Logical thinking. Honestly, seeing you mope like this makes me uncomfortable. Harry was in their bedroom watching Draco brood in a corner while he peeled an apple. Draco had barely spoken since they came back. Harry sighed. What do you want me to do? Sit here and listen to you insult me, Draco snapped. You can try, but I might punch you. Then he erupted. That muggle was an idiot. He lied to her about the squib thing, and she still believed him. Moron. Dimwit. Imbecile. He snatched the freshly peeled apple from Harry's hand. Harry's brows lifted. He reached for it, but Draco bit in first. Fine, Harry muttered, leaning back and picking up a banana instead. Now I see what the professors meant. You can see the facts, you just don't like them. Those aren't facts, Draco protested. Then what are? Do you want the French Minister for Magic to tell you? The Aurors already visited the Rosier family house looking for Patrick's birth parents. How do you know? Harry asked. Isabelle told me, Draco said casually. Isabelle? Draco snapped back, louder. Who's she? She's the witch guarding the holding cell, Harry explained. She just graduated from Beauxbatons and is doing Auror training. She takes safe, easy shifts on the side. Harry reopened his spellbook, chewing the end of the peel as he thought. She said Patrick's been pitifully treated, abandoned by his parents and hit with all kinds of confundo and memory charms. The Aurors managed to undo most of them, but he's not a wizard. He's a squib. His mind's damaged, maybe permanently. Draco had nothing to say to that. He scowled and gnawed the apple as if the fruit itself were to blame. Around lunchtime, Severus and Lupin returned. They came up to the boys' bedroom, and the four of them ate together. Harry greeted them cheerfully and told them the morning's events. Patrick's never had any luck, he said, sadly. Severus considered that in silence while Lupin shook his head. His greatest luck was meeting his wife, Lupin said softly. That was worth more than everything he lost. That's why he begged you to find her and apologize. You said Rosier was adopted in a Paris orphanage? Severus asked suddenly. Harry nodded, puzzled by the question. He told me himself, Severus added, surprising them both. Lupin's eyes met Severus's, and he caught the implication. The place we visited this morning? A home for squibs must be it, Severus murmured. He tapped his temple thoughtfully. What I wonder is whether Rosier knew the orphanage specialized in people like him. What difference would that make? Lupin asked. Severus's voice went colder and firmer. He's been hit with heavy memory and confundus charms. In skilled hands, those can rough-cut memories the way legilimency can. Cruder, far more damaging, and less precise. He looked at them all. Rosier's memory's been scrubbed. That explains his bungled trip to Edinburgh. His mind is broken. With that much obliviation, the killers knew every memory. If they only wanted his flat, why so many charms? They couldn't do legilimency and must have wanted something from a squib's head. What? His identity? Pureblood squib? Lupin breathed. The two rarest things about him, Severus said. The attack ties to both. If the killers care about more than the flat, if they care about a pureblood squib, then knowing a Paris orphanage houses others, will they strike again? Critical suspicion, Lupin declared. We must warn Yuma, now! Severus gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. At my father's insistence, I attended a Muggle primary school, and I never stopped cultivating that mindset. It's the very source of my potion's aptitude. Lupin's expression softened with admiration. Your father foresaw all this that far ahead? Severus's face hardened for a moment. No. He drank and beat us. My mother hid her witch identity from him. When he discovered the truth, he was furious. Even after I showed magical talent, he still forced me into a Muggle school. Lupin shifted, uncomfortable, and immediately apologized. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought that up, and in front of the children. It's nothing. Severus's voice was even. Once you truly choose to forgive and accept the painful past, it stops being unspeakable. The past didn't defeat us. It made us stronger. He looked at Harry as he finished. Of course, Harry answered loudly, lifting his chin. Lupin grinned. Draco said nothing. He simply lowered his head and curled his lip in a quiet, insolent protest at Severus's praise of Muggle schooling. After lunch, they went to find Yuma again. Yuma had good news when they arrived. It's confirmed. The man is Shafiq. We contacted the German ministry. They arrested the bastard before and have plenty of files. Comparing their data clinched the identification. The moment we ID'd him, the ministry passed word to the field Aurors. Lion just reported fresh leads at a rural farm. Are you coming? Severus showed none of the excitement Yuma expected. He narrowed his eyes and gripped the African wizard's shoulder. You've just confirmed Shafiq's identity from German records, and he immediately slips up so Aurors can chase him in Lyon? That does sound too convenient. It's the only lead, so most Aurors in Paris will rush there. Yuma froze then, as if doused with cold water, cooled. It does sound too convenient, but it's the only lead we've got, he protested. Precisely because it's the only lead, most Aurors will flood to Lyon, Severus said. Once you leave, Paris will be almost undefended. If something happens here, can you get back in time? Yuma swallowed hard and looked between Severus and Lupin. What could happen in Paris? How many Aurors have already gone? Severus strode toward the fireplace. Apparition was blocked inside the French ministry, so they would use flu. Yuma hurried to follow. Besides 3 standing guard details inside, everyone else has been sent to Lyon. My team hasn't moved. They're waiting for my order. Then gather them and send one to alert Gerard, Severus said. If Lyon fails to nab Shafiq at once, some aurors must be ready to come straight back to us. At the ministry's fireplace, Yuma watched Severus and Lupin take flue powder. Where are you going now? To the orphanage we visited this morning, Severus said before stepping into the flames. After abducting the Lemay couple, Shafiq's group may still have unfinished business. With those words, the two vanished in green fire. Yuma frowned, pulled out a memo and scribbled a summons, then beckoned toward the shadows. A sleek black cat leapt gracefully out of the darkness and took the note in its teeth. Auror Headquarters, Office 7. Give it to Philippe Dumont, Yuma called, and the cat bounded away and melted back into the shadows. Yuma himself hurried to Gerard's office. Severus's warning had to be delivered in person. 128. Something's not right. The key to solving the mystery. Are you ready? Don't worry. Thomas has already lured all the aurors to Lyon. No one knows we're here. Damn it, those aurors are too close. We can't stay in France for long. Did she say when we can move on to Austria? No. Having Nicolas Flamel alone isn't enough. We must get those other things too. Who's with Thomas in Lyon? Carlo. With him there, Thomas will be fine. Then we have to be careful. Once we slip in, we must contact that little mouse. Quiet! Someone's coming! The convent smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and soap. Not long after Severus and the others had left that morning, two elderly men appeared at the gate as the nuns finished lunch with the children in the courtyard. They were wrapped in plain coats, travel-worn and disheveled, as if they had walked a long way. The nun who had spoken to Yuma earlier opened the door cautiously when she saw them asking for help. "What is it you need?" she asked. "Kind miss, we are vagrants from Le Coudray-Monceau. Could you spare something to eat? We haven't eaten all day," the black-haired man said. His French was accented, unmistakably not native, but many travelers spoke in strange tongues. The other, a little older and wearing a battered little round hat, echoed the plea. "Please, we don't need money, just some bread and water." After a small hesitation, the nun let them in. "Please come in. We still have some warm food and soup. You can sit and eat." "Thank you. Thank the Lord." They bowed, profuse in their gratitude, and followed her into the convent. The courtyard was empty. The children had gone in for their naps. Once inside, the two beggars watched everything closely, too closely. They did not appear confused or unfamiliar with the layout. They seemed only to be pretending to follow. Mother Amy, having just finished tidying the kitchen, heard the commotion and stepped into the dining room. "What is it, Lefebvre?" "These two gentlemen haven't eaten all day," the nun said. "They asked for food and water." Amy nodded without surprise. A convent's doors were meant to be opened to the needy. It was not unusual for vagrants to arrive. "Go check on the children. There's some leftover sausage and bread. I'll fetch it for them." The two men bowed and offered more thanks. The nun who had brought them in went to the nursery while Mother Amy carried a basket of food to the dining table and sat opposite the men, determined to stay until they had eaten. The strangers looked at the bread and sausage, but did not reach for them. Instead, they exchanged a look and slid their right hands into their sleeves. Amy's attention drifted to the corridor outside the window. She heard hurried footsteps. Her face tightened when she saw Severus and Lupin rushing up the outer passage, men who had left only 2 hours earlier. For a split second, her expression showed shock, then it softened back toward the table. When she blinked, the two shabby men had each drawn a small wooden stick from their sleeves. "What are you doing?" Amy cried, stepping back. Startled by her shout and the pounding feet in the corridor, the two old men ignored Amy's retreat and turned in time to see Severus and Lupin bursting through the doorway. Severus was instantaneous, his wand already in his grip. "Protego," he began, but the enemy moved with a rapport and speed that was anything but ordinary. "Petrificus totalis," Severus cried. A crimson bolt blasted from his wand, but it struck a firm concentric field. "Protego totalum," one of the men intoned. The shield took the blow as if it had been prepared for the spell. Then, as the shield flared, another voice shouted, "Confringo!" A thunderous explosion shook the room. Lupin flung up his own wand and cast finite incantatem in a rush, staving off the spreading blast. Severus swept a gust of wind through the smoke and dust, clearing the air, and the two men were gone. Where they had stood were two smoking craters. Severus and Lupin exchanged a look. "They're not ordinary," Lupin said. "No normal wizard has that level of coordination. Many Aurors can't even pull that off." "Not among the Death Eaters either," Severus replied coldly. "Unless they're one of those locked up in Azkaban, no one outside, not even if Barty were here, would move in such perfect tandem with someone else. They must have concealed themselves somehow." "Can we trace where they apparated to?" Lupin asked. Severus shook his head. "This is France. Only the French ministry can track all apparitions and disapparitions. We can't. For now, it's enough that we stopped them and confirmed their objective." Mother Amy returned then, panting and clutching her wand. Living long among muggles, she had not always kept her wand at her person. "Where did they go?" she asked. "They fled as soon as they saw we were wizards." Severus looked at her. Lupin asked quickly, "Are the children all right?" "Children? They came for the children?" Amy's brow creased. Severus held her gaze. "Since you were honest with us this morning, tell me, how many squibs do you have here?" "Two. Only two. One was abandoned by his parents, and the other's father died. His witch mother didn't want him." Her voice was steady but small. Squibs among wizarding families were rare enough that two in one convent was notable, but more worrying was the timing. They were talking when Yuma and his subordinates arrived. When Severus explained what had happened and his belief that the attackers intended to kidnap squib children for some alchemical purpose, Yuma's face went pale. "Are they trying to use squibs as ingredients in some alchemy ritual?" he demanded. "At Beauxbatons, I did well in alchemy, but I've never heard of squibs having any elemental property useful to alchemy." "They were clearly aiming for this convent," Lupin said. "The men in Lyon were a decoy. This is the place they really wanted." Yuma inhaled hard and nodded. "I'll inform Gerard at the ministry and make sure these children are protected." He immediately organized his men to send a report back and to remain here until the matter was secure. When Yuma finished, Severus and Lupin left. Severus's expression was troubled. "I still feel something's not right," he muttered. Lupin shrugged. "We arrived in time. If we'd hesitated even a moment, those men would have attacked Amy. She was no match, and the children would have been in danger." "That's not it." Severus paused, replaying the intrusion. "Those two behaved oddly. Why didn't they act sooner? Thomas had already drawn the Aurors to Lyon. This was the perfect opportunity. Why did they walk in and then hesitate? Why only draw wands after meeting Amy? Maybe they didn't know what was inside, couldn't confirm how many wizards were present. No, they were too skilled to be that cautious." Severus shook his head. "There's something else." He led Lupin back to the apartment building on the 16th arrondissement and paused on the far side of the street to stare up at the tall structure across from them. He had the sense the building itself was a piece of the puzzle. "They kidnapped Nicholas Flamel and performed some alchemical rite here," Severus said aloud, almost to himself. "But was it really just an experiment?" He turned to Lupin. "Remus, can you do me a favor?" "What do you need?" Lupin asked, drawing his wand more out of habit than suspicion. "Go back to the French ministry and help me procure a camera." 129. I am deeply grateful and will not thank you. I am deeply grateful and will not thank you. Mr. Snape, after these photos are developed, do we need to add a developing potion to them? The Auror in the Reconnaissance Technology Unit at the Auror headquarters of the French Ministry of Magic looked up as he spoke. Severus did not answer at once. He took the prints the Auror handed over and studied them in the bright light. Under the sharp blue Paris sky, the limestone apartment block in the photographs looked oddly out of place among the cheerful, colorful buildings around it. Severus turned one of the photos so that the Auror could see it. "When you look at this building, does it remind you of anything?" he asked. The Auror, primarily a technician with little field experience, scratched his head. Haussmannian style, late 19th, early 20th century. Compared to cities like London or Venice, it can seem a bit uniform. If the facades are very tall or the blocks very massive, they make the streets feel closed in, almost prison-like. But it's precisely that style that people imagine when they think of modern Paris, he added. Tourists come and see it and praise it, saying, "That's the look of Paris." Severus gave him a few more measured looks. You know a lot about Muggle architecture. Both my parents are architects, the Auror said with a shrug. They're Muggles. If Beauxbatons hadn't taken me, I'd have become a planner like them. But after learning magic, I ended up here developing photos. Severus allowed himself the barest smile. Fate is inscrutable. He collected all 5 photographs and nodded his thanks. No need for the developing potion. These aren't pictures of people, and they won't be printed in the press. After a short farewell to the helpful Auror, Severus left the reconnaissance technology office holding the prints. Lupin, who had returned the borrowed camera, met him in the corridor. "What do you want to do next?" Lupin asked. "That unusual apartment block, top room in the center, and an alchemical ritual inside that looks incomplete and seems to have had no effect." Severus listed the anomalies as he handed 2 of the photographs to Lupin. "I have a feeling the key to this kidnapping lies here. The French Aurors haven't decided whether Nicolas Flamel was taken for the Philosopher's Stone itself or for the knowledge to make it, but the ritual sketched in that apartment was conducted using Flamel. It points to their objective. If we can interpret what they were trying to accomplish, we can probably deduce who is capable of such a plan and eventually find them." Lupin read the implication between the lines. "You still don't think this group is tied to the Death Eaters?" Severus shook his head. "At first, I suspected they weren't because of Barty's habits. After Shafiq deliberately staged things in Lyon to draw the Auror's attention, I'm certain they aren't Death Eaters. This group is almost certainly using Shafiq's identity as a Death Eater as a smokescreen, misleading the French Ministry of Magic and concealing their true purpose and next moves." Lupin's face grew grave. "The wizards we met today were competent and coordinated. If, as you say, they have execution capacity, meticulous planning, and organizational strength, I can't think of anyone who fits that profile other than Aurors from major national ministries of magic. An ordinary criminal wouldn't think to kidnap Nicolas Flamel and provoke an entire country's wizarding force." Severus tucked the photographs under his arm and nodded toward the archives. "Then we go to the Auror archives. To check for anything linked to that apartment?" Lupin asked. Severus hesitated, as if he had just remembered something else. "And to borrow a quiet potion room, we should begin working on an improved wolfsbane potion. The preliminary formula is sound. It largely neutralizes the extreme toxicity of traditional wolfsbane aconite, and by adding dragon's blood, it strengthens the body and can prolong life." Lupin fell silent, caught between shame and gratitude. He had never imagined he would owe Severus Snape anything like this. Words of thanks felt inadequate. Severus noticed the expression and waved it off casually. "No need for showy gratitude. Who told you were my big nephew?" The odd, familiar address stopped Lupin's overthinking. He decided to keep his thanks private rather than attempt words that would ring cheap compared to what had been done for him. Their talk wandered to the Wizengamot and the Order of Merlin. "If the Wizengamot grants it, will you and Lyle go to the Ministry's investiture?" Lupin asked. "Of course," Severus said. "That's the surprise I told Lyle about." "Will many attend?" "Almost all previous recipients and a number of notable wizards. It will be lively." They walked on, exchanging small talk, heading for the archives. The presence of the other Severus, the ghost that had once been all rancor, remained, but it was quieter than before. The improvements to the wolfsbane potion had softened that bitterness. The ghost sat within Severus' mind, scowling and listening, no longer the volatile thing it had been. "Don't just sit there. Severus murmured to it as if indulging an old companion. "Come on, let's go tell Patrick what Mary said so he can stop worrying." While Severus and Lupin made plans in the archives, Harry was working on a different problem. He had been trying to persuade Draco to accompany him back to the detention room and report the morning's events to Rosier, the squib who had upended some of Draco's assumptions about pure-blood families. Draco absolutely refused. "If you want to go, then go," Draco snapped, clutching the books he'd borrowed from the Auror headquarters reading corner, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and Quidditch Through the Ages. "You said you'd already read both until they wore out. Why read them again?" "That'll do me better than seeing a squib," Draco said, spinning away so he didn't have to look at Harry. Harry thought fast. "After we visit Patrick, I can take you somewhere brilliant." No tricks, Draco said. I'm not going anywhere with you. Isabel told me where the broom management room is, Harry said, grinning. She said anyone can go in, and there's a broom testing ground expanded with undetectable extension charms. Except for the brand new racing brooms that are locked away, you can ride any of the older ones. Draco's resistance visibly wavered, though his back was still turned. Harry stretched the last syllable out mischievously. You really don't want to go. What a shame. Some people love Quidditch so much and have only ever ridden a child's toy broom. Meanwhile, I, who don't even know the rules, am going to feel that real rush of speed today. Draco slammed the books down on the table and stood. If you trick me again, you're dead. Harry said nothing. He walked ahead with the look of a boy who had won a small victory, the grin hidden from Draco's face. They went back to the corridor by the detention room. The novice Auror on duty that morning, Isabel, the one Harry had spoken to before, was still there, looking as bored as any junior on a long shift. What did you have for lunch? She asked listlessly. Harry counted on his fingers. Foie gras, cream of mushroom soup, flaming crepes, and for dessert, millefeuille. She sighed theatrically. They gave you the director's menu. Your treatment is too good. Isn't that normal? Harry asked. We could eat it, but our meal allowance wouldn't cover it. We'd have to pay the difference. Isabel tutted. I certainly wouldn't have said things like that at your age. Draco, who had been waiting, snapped. Hurry up, don't waste time. Under that prodding, Harry led the way into Rosier's detention room. 130. His companions abandoned him. Thank you so much. Really, thank you. Rosier said it to Harry with an expression of genuine gratitude. Draco stood with his arms folded, chin tilted as if the world owed him a favor. Harry clapped Rosier on the shoulder. You're so close. Never doubt she'd be angry with you over this. Rosier stared a few seconds, then buried his face in his hands. I know I should trust her. She's always been so understanding, but ever since I left home for Edinburgh, my head's been a muddle. I keep imagining nonsense, terrified Mary will leave me. Harry looked at him with pity. He recognized the aftermath of repeated memory charms. Rosier's mind had been worn thin. Even St. Mungo's had yet to make breakthroughs with such damage. Still, Rosier seemed oddly buoyant. Perhaps the clutter left no room for darker thoughts. After a brief, fumbling pause, he began to rummage through a nearby cabinet. Once the Aurors confirmed I had nothing to do with the hijacking, they returned my things. I should give you something, just a moment. He produced a silver bracelet, a handful of keys, and a pair of gloves, looking lost. Did I own these? Sorry, I've forgotten so much. You probably don't want them. I still have a few things. Mary and I bought souvenirs in Edinburgh. Oh, Volka's, butter shortbread. Everyone takes a box or two. At last he found something suitable and pressed a small tin into Harry's hands. Harry accepted it without fuss and asked, Did the Aurors say when you'll be able to go home? No. Rosier shook his head. They sealed the flat Mary and I rented, said the place is still compromised, so we can't return yet. But they told me at noon I can see my wife tomorrow. They're lifting the contact restrictions. Harry smiled. That's wonderful. Draco, clearly bored with domesticities, nudged Harry toward the broom control room. Harry said goodbye to Rosier and followed him. The Aurors broom store was as the young witch had described, unguarded. Apart from a handful of new high-speed models locked away, the older brooms were free for the taking. Draco sneered at a battered rack. Moondreams, he said. 90-year-old relics, and the French Aurors still keep them. And silver arrows, about to snap. Do these even fly? Harry wasn't picky. It was his first time seeing broomsticks up close, and even battered wood looked fascinating. The room had been expanded by an undetectable extension charm. The ceiling climbed 10 meters, and the space was as wide as a pitch. Do you know how to ride one? He asked, both nervous and excited. Draco struck a pose, pure blood pride writ across his face. Of course. I started on a toy broom at 2, a replica of a Cleansweep 3, far superior to these antiques. So I just sit on it? Harry picked a silver arrow and straddled it. Draco laughed at his posture. Brooms aren't that clumsy. With theatrical flair, Draco stood before a moondream, his hand hovering above the shaft. Up! The decrepit broom sprang to life and jumped into his palm. Ha! At least this junk obeys. Even his praise carried a sneer. Harry copied him. He released his broom and repeated the gesture. The silver arrow hopped neatly into his hand. From there, Draco's bragging collapsed. He mounted his broom and couldn't find his balance. Harry, the instant his hands closed around the shaft, felt something ancient and sure wake inside him. A small, cozy memory unfurled. He was astride a toy broom, a man who looked just like him, laughing beside him, and a beautiful witch with emerald eyes smiling at them both. Without being taught, he gripped the shaft, kicked off, and leaned forward. The antique Draco had mocked Rose smoothly into the air. Harry laughed with delight as gravity fell away. Draco, only just steadied on his own broom, panicked at the sight and kicked off as well. But his hands were in the wrong place. Once airborne, he couldn't control the broom's path. The shaft bucked and tried to throw him. He shrieked and clung as it dived for the ground. Barely half a meter above the grass, a hand shot out from behind, seized the back of his collar, and hauled him off, setting him safely on his feet. Draco's back was soaked with cold sweat. Harry, hovering nearby, shrugged. "You need to grip farther forward. Better control." "I don't need lessons from you," Draco yelled, mortified. "It's this stupid broom. It won't obey. I'm getting a different one." "Really? Didn't you just say it was old but well-behaved?" Harry needled. "Shut up," Draco snapped. Meanwhile, in an empty ministry evidence warehouse, Severus Snape had requisitioned a room to brew a batch of the new wolfsbane. Lupin looked uneasy as the smell of simmering ingredients rose. I've never drunk anything like this before," he admitted. "Then savor it." Snape surveyed the cauldron. "Katie Bell's improved formula is a stroke of genius. Awarding her a second-class Order of Merlin is an insult. The Ministry refuses to see werewolves as people. Wolfsbane doesn't cure the change, but it solves the worst part. Take it in the week before the full moon, and when the night comes, you'll keep your mind even in wolf form." If anyone at the Ministry had a brain, they'd realize how terrifying a conscious werewolf is as a living weapon, Lupin said. Troll-level resistance, venom deadlier than a nundu, thunderbird agility, plus a thinking mind. Snape clapped Lupin's shoulder with a brief, approving smirk. "One night a month, you're near invincible, an effective wizard slayer." Lupin managed a wry smile. "The potion's ruinously expensive, rare ingredients and brutal brewing. Most werewolves, and plenty of wizards, could never afford it." "Stick with Uncle Snape, and you'll never run dry," someone joked. Snape straightened from the cauldron. "Let it simmer. We'll be back tomorrow." They had just stepped outside when Yuma hurried up to them, urgency written all over his face. The moment he saw them, he blurted, "We've found Shafiq in Lyon." The words stopped Severus and Lupin cold. "You actually have him?" Severus asked, skeptical. "Yes. Well, we found him on a farm outside Lyon," Yuma said, troubled. "He's a drooling idiot. No memory, no mind. Just dumped there." Severus frowned. "Idiot how? Someone crucioed him into madness?" "No, worse." Yuma's face had gone white. "A memory charm strong enough to kill, layered dozens of times. We couldn't even count. At least 100. It's horrific. His mind's been scoured clean, an empty shell. His own people, they abandoned him. French Ministry of Magic, Auror Headquarters, temporary interrogation room. Nearly every senior Auror in France had gathered there. Laurentia Gerard, head of the Auror Headquarters, sat in the principal seat at the front, with a dozen chief Aurors behind her. Seated on the iron interrogation chair before them was a middle-aged man with an expression like a hollow shell and blank, vacant eyes. He had distinct Arab features. This was Thomas Shafiq, the man Lyon Aurors had captured, a former Death Eater and the prime suspect in the disappearance of the LeMay couple. But Shafiq's mental state was not one that could be interrogated. Experts from the Ministry and St. Mungo's, who specialized in memory charms and cognitive damage, had examined him in detail and reached the same grim conclusion. An excessive number of memory charms had wiped his mind almost completely. He had been turned into something close to an empty husk, incapable of coherent thought, incapable of providing the information the Aurors needed. The initial excitement at having taken Shafiq in had curdled into a heavy, suffocating gloom. At that moment, Yuma arrived, accompanied by Severus Snape and Remus Lupin. Gerard rose automatically when she saw Severus, and without wasting pleasantries, put the question that hung over everyone. "Yuma has already briefed you, Mr. Snape. Do you have any solution for this?" Severus did not answer at once. He walked to Shafiq and, as an expert in legilimency and occlumency, attempted to penetrate the man's thoughts. He drew his wand, pointed it at Shafiq's temple, murmured quietly, and rotated the shaft. A pale silver light showed at the wand tip, but nothing came back. After a more careful examination, Severus shook his head. A vast number of memory charms have caused severe physiological damage to his mental faculties, he said flatly. This is not something you reverse by simply breaking the charms. Aside from a heartbeat and reflex breathing, he is almost indistinguishable from a living corpse. Gerard, unwilling to accept that answer, asked one more question. Is there no potion or treatment that can save him? Severus met her eyes and spoke of an episode from Britain. After you know who disappeared, some of his devotees tried desperately to find him. They captured a British Auror couple, the Longbottoms, and tortured them repeatedly with the Cruciatus curse. They survived, but they were made insane by it. The damage was permanent. They have been in St. Mungo's for 8 years. Shafiq's condition is comparable. Silence fell. The Aurors in the room had regarded Shafiq as their biggest break in the case. If he talked, they might find the Lamaze. Now he sat before them, ruined. Anger flared into the edge of panic. Some felt the act of leaving such a man for the Aurors to find was a deliberate provocation. One man slammed his fist on the table. Monstrous, he spat. Whoever did this, they're monsters. If Shafiq had been killed outright, the Aurors might have had a grim satisfaction. But this was worse. The culprits had reduced one of their own to this state and left him to be discovered. If they would do that to an accomplice, what hope was there for the Lamaze? The question hung in the room like smoke. After a long moment, Gerard drew herself up and spoke in an icy voice. They are insulting us. If you can tolerate this level of insult, she continued, voice sharpening, then perhaps Auror headquarters has no place underneath the Ministry of Magic. Her words stung. One by one, senior Aurors rose, faces set, and left the interrogation room in a charged silence, ready to act harsher than before. Previously, the searches around France had been restrained. Deference to prestige, influence, and public reputation had tempered actions against some pure-blood families. That restraint was over. The humiliation had ended any qualms about upsetting those with connections. Once only Severus, Lupin, Yuma, and Gerard remained, Gerard turned to Severus with a quieter tone. I know about the incident at the Abbey. Your intervention saved those children. Thank you. Are you still sifting through the archives? Severus nodded. There are clues that need verification. Use Yuma for whatever you need, Gerard said. If his clearance isn't high enough, bring him to me. Severus accepted the offer without comment. He appreciated the political backing it implied. Even if some files were ones a visiting British wizard should not be allowed to see alone. He and Lupin returned to the Auror archives, joined by 3 archivist Aurors, and began the massive task of combing through the photographs, comparing them against the image taken outside the apartment building. Outside the archives, the ministry's changes rippled through the French magical community. Aurors swept out in force, raiding black markets and arresting figures who normally escaped scrutiny. Teams visited notorious pure-blood houses, searched and interrogated without yielding to old deferences. Those families fumed. They tried to call in favors, to mobilize influence in the ministry and the press. Their attempts met a rude surprise. Gerard had gone to see the French minister about the interrogation earlier that afternoon. Over an hour later, she emerged with the ministry's full political support. The powerful lost whatever protection they'd counted on. Arrests multiplied. Investigators were stationed at the Abbey in the Paris suburbs that the Lamaze supported, watching every entry and exit. Fingers were pried into the underworld of illegal wizards. For the first full day, Severus and Lupin worked through the archives without result. It was only after dark, when the ministry emptied of most of its daytime staff, that anything changed. In the dim, yellow light of the late hours, the ministry was watched by its own peculiar security, small black cats. In the French ministry, they did more than deliver notes. They patrolled the corridors, a perfunctory and oddly comforting protection at night. Several of them were cleaning themselves in a corridor outside the Auror offices when a faint rustle made their ears prick up. They lowered their haunches and tilted their heads, listening. After 2 slow circuits and a careful sniff, They found nothing and dismissed the noise. At that same moment, high above them in a nearby residence, Harry, who had been fast asleep, bolted upright in his bed. A voice, close and urgent as if speaking directly into his ear, had cut through a dream. "Find it. Must find that thing. Must find it. This is an order." Startled awake, Harry sat up and scanned the dim room by the weak night lamp. Apart from Draco, still fast asleep, there was no one else. Harry climbed down from the bed as quietly as he could. He didn't wake Draco. Instead, he padded to the door and eased it open. Who's there?" he whispered. The corridor was empty. Only a few small black cats, racing and tumbling over one another, lifted their heads to look at him. The ministry guards passed by, glancing at Harry with thinly veiled disdain before striding on. Harry lingered in the doorway, stunned. He was certain he hadn't imagined the voice that had woken him. This had not been sleep talk. Still in his pajamas, he peered into the dark hallway. His eyes drifted up to the ceiling, and in a shadowed corner, he caught a faint glint. A thin trail of moisture running along a pipe, barely reflecting the light. The mark was so subtle, he would have missed it if he hadn't looked up. He followed the trail. The little cats watched him with interest. They seemed to understand who he was and didn't treat him as an intruder. He tracked the watermarks all the way to the ministry's main hall. Then they stopped. The pipes were buried in the walls here. Beyond that point, the trail simply vanished. Only then did he realize how alone he was. The great hall hummed with silence, and dozens of the small black cats sat motionless, their eyes blinking and glittering in the dim. Harry's spine prickled. The next instant, he spun and ran back the way he'd come, sprinting down the corridor, bursting into the Auror quarters, slamming the door and crawling under the covers. He must have made enough noise. Draco, half asleep, blinked and lifted his head. "What are you doing?" Draco mumbled. Harry said nothing. He shut his eyes and forced himself to breathe slowly until his heart calmed. Draco grumbled a reply, turned over, and fell back asleep. The rest of the night, Harry spent in a haze between sleep and wakefulness, haunted by that one soft sound that had dragged him out of bed. He tossed until dawn. At breakfast, Lupin and Severus Snape joined them in the bedroom as usual. Harry told the two men exactly what had happened. "A strange voice?" Snape asked, frowning. Draco snorted. "Just a nightmare. Stop making a fuss. You're still a kid." Snape was serious. "Are you certain it was a voice in the air, not something in your head?" he asked. He meant the fragment of Voldemort's soul. If Harry had heard something inside his mind, it might be that. But in the original timeline, such sensations only began when Voldemort started preparing to return. Logically, Voldemort should still be a shade, wandering Albania. How could Harry be sensing anything now? Lupin noticed the worry in Snape's voice and watched Harry closely. Harry paused, thinking back to the moment he'd woken, and then answered steadily, "I'm sure I heard it for real, coming from outside the room. I went looking for it and saw water stains on the pipes. I followed them out past the Auror area, all the way to the ministry's main hall before I realized and ran back." He didn't say he had turned and fled because he was frightened. Draco was right there, and Harry couldn't bring himself to admit it out loud. Severus considered this, his expression unreadable. If the sound had been real and not inside Harry's head, what could it have been that only Harry heard in the night? He had an idea forming. "If it happens again," Snape said, "come straight to my room." Harry nodded. Draco rolled his eyes and went back to his fried eggs. After breakfast, Snape sent Lupin to the archives to continue the comparisons they'd started, while he went to find Yuma. The French Auror captain was visibly exhausted. Since the arrests had intensified the previous afternoon, almost every Auror's schedule was packed, screening and interrogating detained suspects. "I'm practically drowning," Yuma complained as soon as Snape appeared. "They rounded up half the black market potion dealers in France. These people mostly resell contraband. How are they supposed to be involved?" Snape cut to the point. "Are there any departments in the ministry that keep snakes?" Yuma hesitated. "Other than the guards, unauthorized animals and magical creatures aren't allowed inside the ministry." Snape nodded as if that confirmed something. He warned Yuma before leaving, "Tell your colleagues to be cautious. It's one thing to hunt outside. Don't let that blind you to someone slipping into headquarters while you're away." Yuma frowned and took the warning to Gerard. At the archives, Lupin held a yellowed sheet of parchment, comparing it to photographs in his hand. His face had a solemn set to it. "Any discoveries?" Snape asked. Lupin handed him the parchment. A black and white photograph, glued to the page, showed the corner of a building. The picture had been torn in half. Someone had deliberately destroyed part of the record. Below it, in neat script, was a single line: August 13th, 1944, Austria. Snape took the page to the three aurors working in the archives. One examined it and explained, "The Auror archives don't hold everything. A small portion of the highest security files were separated and kept in the minister's office safe. This looks like one of those high-level documents relating to Austria." "Can Gerard request access?" Snape asked. The Auror hesitated. Supervisor Gerard might have the authority, but the minister could object. Top-secret files touch on the security of the French ministry. In plain terms, they were British visitors on French soil. Any documents tied to the ministry's security were restricted. Snape didn't need to see the rest himself. He would take the photographs he had to Gerard and let her decide. While the British aurors finished their checks, the French teams turned up an unexpected lead in their sweeping arrests. Flamel's house elf had been brought to the ministry and, confronted with the opal necklace, cried out in recognition. "Yes, that's the necklace Mistress wore," it wailed. "Master gave it to her for their 300th wedding anniversary. She wore it almost every day." The elf's identification electrified the room. All eyes flipped back to the alley where they'd found the opal necklace, an illegal peddler's stall on a disreputable street. The vendor, a thin wizard who didn't look particularly old, was pale and shaking. "Someone sold it to me a few days ago," he blurted. "It wasn't mine. A man in a black robe and hood said the source wasn't clean. I bought them cheap." The chief auror's eyes lit. "Not just the necklace. What else?" The vendor swallowed. "3 items. An old opal necklace, a crystal ball with an undecipherable prophecy, and a muggle trinket. I paid 23 galleons and 7 sickles for the first 2. The third was thrown in." No one wanted to risk lying about involvement in Nicholas Flamel's case. Within minutes, subordinates had recovered the 3 items the vendor described and displayed them on the table for every auror present to see. 133. Inquiry about flashlights. An opal necklace, an old crystal ball, and a common household flashlight. The auror's attention was almost entirely on the necklace and the crystal ball. Only a few Muggleborns glanced at the flashlight. "What is that crude iron cylinder?" one wizard, unfamiliar with Muggle devices, asked after a moment. "It's a Muggle lighting tool," someone explained. "You put batteries in, flip the switch, and the bulb at the front lights up." "What about the prophecy in the crystal ball? Can it be interpreted?" Gerard's eyes were fixed on the orb. The head auror beside her answered. "Diviners need time. The best diviner in the ministry is the divination professor from Beauxbaton, but he's on vacation in Spain. Should we call him back?" "Notify him to return immediately," Gerard ordered, "and start investigating the person who sold these items." An auror chimed in with a suspicion. "This Muggle item probably didn't come from the LeMays. It could be connected to the Rosier family's squib. Should we bring him in for identification?" "Arrange it. We need to know whether this thing has any special properties or history." They moved quickly. The opal necklace was sealed. The crystal ball with its prophecy was sent to the Hall of Prophecy, and the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office took charge of the flashlight. Their employees dismantled it completely, then inspected each component with a device that looked like an oversized electrified fly swatter. "What are these circuits for?" one man asked, puzzled by the tangle of wires. He was a half-blood whose father repaired appliances. Though untrained, he had grown up around wiring and understood small electrical devices. A household flashlight usually didn't need so many wires. His colleague scanned the wiring with the swatter. When nothing triggered, he shrugged. "Maybe it's a newer Muggle model. They tend to make things more complicated. If you want a light to work on batteries, it's not as simple as chanting a spell." That settled the matter for the first man. They finished the inspection, confirmed nothing magical was detected, and reassembled the flashlight. Not long after, Rosier and his wife Mary were summoned. They sat close together in the interview room, leaning on each other. Opposite them were the head auror, at several ordinary aurors, and the inspected flashlight. "Don't be nervous," an auror said softly. "The ministry has determined you're not suspects. We just want some information." He pointed at the flashlight. "Is this yours?" Rosier and Mary looked at it, surprised to see their worn object in ministry hands. After a pause, Rosier answered, "Yes, I bought this for my wife when we first met. She sometimes worked late and was afraid to walk home in the dark." The auror's expression fell slightly, but he continued, "Where did you buy it?" "At a department store in the 16th arrondissement. It was a promotional item." "You used it continuously?" "My wife used it for 2 years. About 2 or 3 months ago, it started malfunctioning. The light got much dimmer. It was cheap, so we didn't bother fixing it. We kept it as a memento." Rosier held Mary's hand tightly as he spoke. Finally, he asked, "Is there something wrong with it?" The auror didn't answer directly. After conferring in hushes with a few colleagues, they shrugged. "It's a completely ordinary item. He's not lying. These sell in muggle shops, probably taken from their home by the culprits, thinking they could fence it." Their expectations for the flashlight dwindled. Still, the head auror gestured to a subordinate to hand it to Rosier so he could examine it himself. He turned it over in his hands, noting it felt slightly heavier, perhaps his imagination. He flicked the switch. A faint white light glimmered from the front. It was exactly as he'd described. The bulb was dim. As he inspected it under the auror's wary eyes, he turned the flashlight and the weak beam shone into his face. "Is there any movement over there?" a voice said. "Worm was released last night. It pinpointed where that thing is." "Do we still need to wait?" "Wait? Why wait? Those aurors, unchanged after all these years, have been completely led by the nose. They've been had." In a shabby rental house on the outskirts of Paris, 3 figures in black robes, faces shadowed, watched the fire as they talked. One rubbed his hands, tense with barely contained excitement. "It's not easy. We've prepared so long. Finally, today we move." Another, quieter, observed, "She wanted to quit, but recent events in Britain made her go all the way." "The escape of Barty Crouch Jr. from Azkaban? Ha!" the third scoffed. "This is our chance. Someone else escaped too." Sirius Black. "Half of Europe is distracted. An island fortress no one had escaped from in 200 years, and suddenly 2 get out in days. Who would have thought?" "Thomas still dreams of going to Britain to meet Barty," the first said. "When I had him in Lyon, he begged, saying he'd atone and begging us to keep our promise." "We promised only to spare his life. Aren't we keeping that promise?" "Everything's going as planned." "Yes, how is Nicholas Flamel?" "Same as always. He's reconciled. He sits downstairs playing wizard's chess with his wife in the attic. Odd, but he's strangely calm about what we're planning. Don't worry what he thinks. As long as we retrieve the item and he cooperates, nothing else matters. We've waited too long to risk a slip now. Carlo, keep a close watch. Whether they've truly given up or are scheming, make sure they have no chance to escape." "Relax," the first replied, standing and fitting his wand into his cuff. "The closer we get, the less nervous we should be. If that lord can return and we can welcome him back ourselves, it'll be worth it." "Get ready for final preparations," the man said, wand tip catching the firelight. "Tonight, we'll light up the whole Paris sky." Back in the interview room, the voice snapped Rosier out of the daze brought on by the flashlight's beam. Mary looked at him with concern. "Are you all right?" He squeezed her hand and smiled. "I'm fine. It's nothing." "Apologies, gentlemen," Rosier added. "My head's been a little muddled lately." The aurors were all too familiar with that. The head auror forced a polite sigh and tried to keep his tone neutral. Compared to before, any changes to the flashlight? Rosier kept his face even. "No, it's still in the same damaged state." With that, there was nothing more to learn from the object. The aurors were already shifting their hopes back to the crystal ball when Rosier said quietly, "If it's no longer of use to you, may my wife and I take it back." He held the flashlight out, earnest. "It was the first present I gave my wife. It means a great deal to us." They exchanged looks. The head auror replied, "You can have it back, but not now. It has to remain sealed as evidence. When this is all concluded, it will be returned." "Thank you," Rosier said with visible relief. "Thank you. That's enough. 134. Even if they are, they cannot be." Auror Headquarters. Archives. After a full day of cross-referencing the last architectural lead, Severus and the four others finally finished combing through every magical world building record in the archives. They turned up 5 structures that resembled the apartment building from the street photograph Severus had taken. None of them, however, felt like the answer. Each was missing something. Too small, not tall enough, not isolated in the same way, or simply lacking any special historical significance. Severus refused to let it rest. He asked Yuma to get Gerard on the line as soon as possible, persuading the busy Auror supervisor to spare a few hours. After lunch, in Gerard's office, Severus handed over the architectural photographs. "I've heard some of the French ministry's most secret files are kept in the minister's office, including architectural records," he said. "Given my status, I wouldn't be able to request access myself. If you have the authority, could you compare these against those files and see if there are any matches?" Gerard did not treat the request lightly. Since arriving in France, the former Slytherin prefect had proved her worth time and again, and she knew better than to dismiss a lead brought by Severus. She took the photos and agreed. "I have a meeting soon. At 2 o'clock, I'll apply to the minister for access, personally cross-check the files, and get you the results by 4. As promised, once her current work was done, Gerard went straight to the minister's office. After obtaining authorization from Minister Rousseau, she opened the safe that held the ministry's most classified material. There were only a handful of files with photographic records. She methodically compared them until one folder caught her eye. A document labeled August 13, 1944, Austria. It contained numerous photographs. When she saw them, she froze. In one hand, she held the street photograph taken by Severus. In the other, an archival full shot of an architectural structure. They were the same. For a long minute, she could hardly breathe, as if paralyzed. It took more than 10 minutes for her to regain control. Panic made her clumsy. As she pushed herself up from the chair, she knocked a large file from the safe, a dossier about conspiracies between the French ministry and goblins during the Goblin Rebellion in England. But she didn't bother to write it. She snatched the 2 photos and hurried back to the minister. "You have to see this," she told Rousseau, thrusting the prints at him. Rousseau, an elderly wizard who had worked in the ministry for 60 years before becoming minister 3 years earlier, took them with hands that had seen far too much. He had been director of 3 divisions over 2 decades and knew the ministry's old records intimately. When he saw the Austria photograph, he went very still. "Who took the other photo?" he asked quietly. "Severus Snape," Gerard replied. "We asked him to assist with the investigation after we suspected the kidnappers might be a group of Death Eaters. He was the first to unmask Thomas Shafik's identity, and he and his colleagues foiled an attempt on the convent sponsored by the Lemay couple. He also pointed out that the building itself was suspicious and asked me to compare it with files I couldn't access without authorization. That's how I found these 2. Identical." Silence filled the office. Rousseau took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, his voice thick with something he didn't entirely conceal. "So, he was right. The people who kidnapped Nicholas Flamel were using this Muggle apartment building as part of a simulation experiment. Their true identity, or their objective, is..." He couldn't finish. His hand clenched so tightly around the photographs his knuckles went white. Gerard's face had drained pale. "Maybe it's coincidence," she said, rushing to placate him. "Or a deliberate attempt to mislead us. Intimidation. It can't be true." Rousseau slammed his hand on his desk. "We wiped that group out decades ago. A similar photograph doesn't prove anything. Didn't you say you'd found decisive clues this morning?" "We did," Gerard said. "We recovered a prophecy crystal ball and were assembling experts to decipher it." "Then focus on that." Rousseau pushed the apartment photo back toward her. "Tell that professor from Britain that this line of inquiry is wrong. Have him drop it and cooperate on the crystal ball investigation." Gerard drew a breath and nodded, taking the photograph. She was about to leave when, as if compelled by something she could not ignore, she turned back to ask, "Minister, if it really is those people..." Rousseau's expression hardened. He cut her off with a blunt finality that brooked no argument. "There is no if," he said. "No matter who they are, they cannot be those people. Even if they were, they cannot be." The contradiction in his words hung in the room, but Gerard, the hard-nosed auror, known in the department as the Iron Lady Witch, swallowed and accepted it. She tucked the photograph away and left, carrying the decision back to Severus and the others. 135. We're Dumbledore's henchmen. Wand posture is key when you cast. Remember how it felt the first time this spell worked. Keep that feeling in mind and practice until it's second nature. That afternoon, Severus did nothing but teach Harry proper spellcasting. In truth, his lessons had begun the moment he handed Harry that birch wand at Hogwarts. Harry's natural talent was excellent, arguably top tier. In a week, he had already learned 2 spells, the Levitation Charm and Petrificus Totalis, though he still lacked finesse. Mostly that was because Harry was playful. He didn't want to devote every waking minute to study. Severus saw nothing wrong with that. Harry already knew far more about his parents than in the original timeline and had far more self-control. And at 9 years old, he was encountering magical instruction 2 years earlier than usual. For now, forcing him to sit with nothing but books would have been too much. Learn when interested, rest when bored. This was how to keep a child's curiosity intact. Harry listened intently whenever Severus lectured. Draco wasn't there. Lupin had taken him to the Ministry of Magic's broomstick management office to apologize. That morning, Harry and Draco had slipped into the broomstick room to play. Draco still couldn't control the moon dream well. In a fit of temper, he slammed it down, and the handle snapped. When Severus and Lupin arrived, Draco didn't try to hide it. He huffed that Severus should take the damage to his father for payment. At worst, he'd replace it with a new moon dream. Severus scolded him. Damaging someone else's property and not telling the owner was essentially stealing. Lupin hauled him off to apologize. Not long after, Lupin returned with Draco in tow. The broom manager was easy to deal with, he said. He saw you sneaking into the broomstick room yesterday, but those public brooms are slow old things and have protection charms. He wasn't too bothered. He added, the broken broom was a discarded, obsolete model the ministry had already written off. He said we didn't need to pay, but I still left 3 galleons. Severus regarded Draco, defiant and sulking, and said calmly, if you make a mistake, you must own up to it. Think about how to make amends instead of running and hiding. That's cowardice, not the bearing a self-proclaimed noble should have. Draco pursed his lips, crossed his arms, and bounced his leg, trying not to show it, until Severus added, a letter from Britain arrived. It's from your mother. Want to see it? The bravado fell apart. Draco snatched the letter and slipped into a corner, small, pretending casual indifference while his eyes went red and a few invisible pearls threatened to spill as he read in secret. It was then that Yuma found them. There's news from Gerard. She wants me to bring you to her. Lupin's face brightened. Severus's expression did not change. He simply watched Yuma carefully. Good news or bad? Yuma frowned. I honestly don't know what she means. She just wants you to come and hear her out. Severus felt a small, cold drop of worry. A result is a result. No result is no result. If Yuma couldn't even say whether Gerard's message was good or bad, that meant something. They followed Yuma to Gerard's office. Gerard had been busy. Stacks of documents and applications waited for her signature. When she saw them enter, she set the papers down, took the photographs Severus had given her, and handed them back at once. This is the wrong direction. Do not continue to investigate. No matter how much you look, you will find nothing here. Yuma will take you to the Auror Joint Investigation Team. We've already coordinated with the British Ministry of Magic. Severus met her eyes. Gerard, however, wouldn't look at him. She went back to her paperwork. What do you mean by, you will find nothing? After you went to the minister's office, did you find what you were supposed to find? She set the documents aside and looked up, shaking her head. No. Severus's gaze sharpened. That is a lie. Your occlumency is poor. Even without actively legilimizing, I can tell when someone is not truthful. Gerard's brows shot up in outrage. You are claiming to probe the mind of the head of the French Auror headquarters? Do you know the consequences? Severus's face remained composed. You speak of consequences instead. In truth, I was lying when I said I could read you without detection. My legitimacy hasn't reached that level, but your true feelings were already clear. The office went silent. Yuma stared, mouth open, bewildered by the exchange. Lupin's brow drew inward. He felt, as Severus had hinted, that something was very wrong. Gerard tried to regain control. Take your photographs back. This is not a suggestion. I'm conveying the current decision of the French Ministry of Magic. The lead connected to that alchemy ritual is dead. You will not find anything new here. Cold and short, her voice left no room for argument. If you insist on continuing, join the joint investigation team with the British Ministry. If you cannot, you may withdraw. Severus. He wasn't angry, he was appraising. There is essentially no difference between the British and French ministries. Politicians speak for their positions, not for truth. Because of the Dark Lord's reign, the British ministry has taboos. They will not accept any hint that the Dark Lord's legacy is resurfacing. He let that sit a moment. The French ministry should be less affected. The Dark Lord's activities were mainly on the British Isles. Yet you are unwilling to let me pursue this photograph after consulting France's highest internal records. That tells me something. Those records contain names or facts the French ministry refuses even to look at. Their mere existence brings shame, perhaps fear, to all of France. The British fear the Dark Lord. You fear something else. Gerard's composure broke. Supervisor Gerard, allow me to suggest, he continued, but she cut him off like a blade. Enough! Her voice trembled, whether with anger or fear was unclear. If you want to write wild fantasies, take them to your friend Vulp for his next novel. Do not drag the French ministry into slander. She stood, hands on the desk. I have said what I had to. Leave now. Yuma made a nervous, pleading gesture, and Lupin's expression went hard. Severus looked on without rancor, only curiosity. He said softly, Very well, we won't disturb Supervisor Gerard's work any longer. Come, Remus. As they turned to go, Lupin fell into step beside him and whispered, Are we really going to let it go? Severus chuckled. How could we? Do you think they alone know the truth about what happened in France? Then who else can we ask? Lupin muttered. Severus stopped, pointed at Lupin's nose with a smile that was equal parts scold and joke. Have you gone mad? We're Dumbledore's henchmen. 136. Both chapters will be updated together tonight. As the title says, my mom finally had a day off, so I took her to the movies. I didn't want her to watch anything too heavy, but she insisted on Nanjing Photo Studio. Sure enough, she cried from start to finish. 137. A one-man prison. When Severus spoke, Lupin reacted immediately. They had come to France to find Nicholas Flamel, armed with a letter of introduction from Dumbledore. Dumbledore and Lemay were friends who had collaborated on alchemical research, work that had earned worldwide renown. Now that Severus had uncovered a crucial clue, the French Ministry of Magic refused to pursue it. But Dumbledore would not turn away from a lead like this. As someone at the center of almost every major event in 20th century European magic, he knew far more than the French Ministry. You stay and look after Harry and Draco. I'm going back to Hogwarts to find Dumbledore, Severus said to Lupin. Having Lupin there had made things easier in many ways. After giving a few instructions, Severus avoided the French ministry's flu and left the building. He found a wizarding pub in Paris, traveled by the flu to Calais, then apparated twice in quick succession until he reached Hogsmeade. From there, he made his way to the headmaster's office. I believe you've already heard about your good friend being kidnapped, Severus said as he entered. Dumbledore, who had been working through dispatches from the International Confederation of Wizards, stopped and looked up. Roughly the day you arrived in Paris, I received word from France, he said. They wrote to me privately as well, saying you had joined their investigation. Severus did not waste time. He set the photographs he had taken of the apartment building on Dumbledore's desk. I did help them, he said, but just as I was getting close to the truth, when I was about to reveal what I'd found, they used these photos to dismiss my findings and tried to stop me from investigating. Dumbledore listened, adjusted his half-moon spectacles, and took the photos. The first glimpse of the building altered his expression subtly. How did you take these? He asked. Severus recounted everything since his arrival in Paris, recognizing Shafiq, the oddities about the apartment building itself, undoing the culprit's original plan to attack the convent, deciding to use that building as the starting point of the investigation, and finally being threatened by Gerard when he persisted. Dumbledore's subtle look slowly turned into a wry smile. "Your suspicion of Gerard was not wrong," Dumbledore said, shaking his head. "After she got these photos from you, she must have dug into the Ministry's top secrets and found a link to that prison in Austria." Severus frowned. He had already found fragments in the Auror headquarters archives that pointed to such secrets. "A prison like Azkaban?" "No," Dumbledore replied. "Not like Azkaban. That prison once held and tortured many innocent wizards. Now it holds only one person, the man who caused it to be built, the prison's original master." As Dumbledore spoke, a book flew from a shelf, crossed half the office, and landed on the desk. Pages ruffled as if by a wind and stopped on a particular plate. There was no text on the page, only a black and white illustration of a tower-like structure hidden in a forest. A tower rose from a ring of gray-black walls. The low cluster of buildings around its base looked nearly identical to the apartment building Severus had photographed. Under the illustration was a single name, Nurmengard. Even without recalling the old stories from his past life, Severus understood in that instant what the French ministry feared him discovering. "Grindelwald," he said. "The people who kidnapped Nicholas Flamel are the acolytes." "Just as you suspected," Dumbledore agreed. "The remnants of Grindelwald's followers arranged the kidnapping. They intend to force Flamel to help them free Grindelwald from Nurmengard." "That apartment building was their attempt," Severus said. "They are too similar. They kidnapped Flamel and coerced him into experiments." A question nagged at Severus, unspoken. If this was a plan for a prison break, why hadn't it appeared in the original story? Had Dumbledore himself intervened before things went far? Dumbledore seemed to read a different thread. He merely shook his head. "This was the private work of his remaining followers," he said. "The prisoner in Nurmengard will not have known they were acting on Grindelwald's behalf." Severus, unfamiliar with much of the lore outside the main plot, he had seen only the films, didn't fully understand. "Why are you so sure?" Dumbledore's voice softened. "What truly traps him is not a physical prison," he said. "It is himself. His prison is inside him, and his followers do not understand that." Dumbledore paused, then asked, "How far do you think those who kidnapped Flamel have gotten?" Severus let his thoughts run. Now that the kidnappers' identities were known, disparate threads fell into place. Things that had seemed coincidental now made sense together. "The French ministry is unwilling to accept this," he said finally. "They must be only one step away from success." 138. The explosion that echoed throughout Paris. Not long after Severus had left the French Ministry of Magic, Harry and Draco were stuck in the common room with nothing to do. They were too embarrassed to go back to the broom shed to practice. After all, they'd broken the broom handle, so they had taken to playing wizard's chess to kill time. Severus had brought the set from Yuma at noon, but he'd been called away by Gerard about the photographs before he could teach Harry how to play. Left with the pieces, Draco, fresh from finishing a letter home, had started showing off, pretending to teach Harry while really lecturing him about proper strategy. Lupin returned alone before they finished their second game. He didn't explain where Severus had gone, only saying he had stepped out to handle some other business and would be back soon. Lupin settled in to watch, offering Harry the occasional bit of guidance, and predictably Draco began to lose far more pieces. The living chessmen on the board were quick to blame their commander for poor tactics. Draco, annoyed, snapped back at Lupin with a petulant jibe about being no one's lackey. He hardly finished the insult before Harry clamped a hand over his mouth to stop him from making a scene. Draco wrestled to free himself, glowering at Harry. The two were on the verge of a full-blown argument when Lupin intervened, cool and disarming. "They deserve the thanks," he said mildly, "and they didn't do nothing either." No, they helped us a great deal. So did Dudley's teacher," Patrick Rosier blurted, stepping into the room with his wife. "That gentleman was a huge help back in Britain, though I didn't even know his name at the time." Harry and Draco looked up in surprise. Both Rosiers had been told they could move about more freely, the Aurors having lifted the strict restrictions earlier, but they still weren't allowed home. Patrick had come straight away to express his gratitude. He spoke with a sincerity that made Harry uncomfortable. He felt he'd merely relayed messages, hardly deserving such thanks. For Draco, though, the moment was intoxicating. This was the first time someone had openly thanked him for something he'd done, and he liked it. He made a show of waving it off, about to puff up with pompous pride, when Harry's hand stopped him. Rosier glanced around, frowning. "Is that gentleman not here?" he asked, looking for Severus. "He's out on business," Harry answered. Lupin asked the practical question next. "Did they tell you when you'll be able to return?" "No," Patrick said. "Our apartment is still sealed off. There's nowhere else for us to live right now." He hesitated, then added quietly, "They said all our appliances and furniture were taken. They said it can't be recovered. Even if we could go home, we wouldn't be able to live there for now." Harry's sympathy was immediate. Rosier's situation brought to mind his own life at Aunt Petunia's. The other man's misfortune was worse by far. "You were forced into this. Once they finish the investigation, they'll figure out compensation for your losses," Harry said. Patrick nodded, but Harry could tell the words barely reached him. Mary hovered close, watching her husband with a growing unease. Since that morning, when Patrick had identified the flashlight, he had seemed off, more distracted, prone to long silences. After a few more minutes of small talk, Patrick stood to go. Before they left, he turned to Lupin. "In 20 minutes, Mary will bring over some biscuits. It's the only thing we can offer right now. I hope you won't mind." He sounded both awkward and humble. Lupin smiled broadly, not wanting their gesture to be taken as anything but welcome. "We look forward to it very much," he said. They left, and Lupin walked them to the door. As he closed it behind them, Harry said, puzzled, "I feel like Mr. Rosier is different." Lupin stroked Harry's hair and sighed softly. "Trauma leaves its mark," he said. "Repeated blows may not break a person, but they change him. I only hope their luck starts to improve after this." No sooner had Lupin finished speaking than a high, piercing shriek sliced through the Auror headquarters. Lupin reacted instantly. He pulled Harry and Draco close and drew his wand. Almost at once, the remaining Aurors spilled from their offices, their cloaks billowing as they poured into the corridor. They gathered in ranks by the burning flue fireplace, ready to go. Yuma pushed through the crowd of Aurors assembling their teams. Lupin seized him, urgency in his voice. "What happened? Is someone attacking the ministry?" "No, thank Merlin, no," Yuma called, voice cracking with alarm. "It's the convent. The scoundrels we left there were overwhelmed. Those attackers forced their way through and are launching a terrorist strike. We have to reinforce them now, or who knows how many people they'll slaughter." The ground beneath them trembled, a violent shudder that ran through the ministry and made everyone inhale sharply. Yuma's face drained of color. His lips went white. "Damn it," he muttered, voice raw. "What have they done now? What on earth have they done?" Above ground in Paris, where night had already settled, the air near the convent was ripped apart. A pillar of fire shot into the sky, and a tremendous explosion followed. Its roar echoed across the city, a sound that turned the night into a single, terrified heartbeat. Fortunately, he was a Death Eater. When reinforcements of Aurors rushed to the scene, they did not charge straight into the epicenter of the explosion. Under the head Auror's direction, they first spread Muggle-repelling charms widely. The blast, heard across almost all of Paris, and the fire that lit half the sky had already attracted every Muggle's attention. The Muggle police hurried toward the convent in patrol cars, but the Auror's charms turned them back. One by one, officers suddenly found implausible reasons to retreat to the station. The chief of the Paris police headquarters grabbed the walkie-talkie and roared into the channel. "Why are you turning back? Go in with the firefighters. We must find out what happened." For a moment, the police cars, resisting the strange impulses, drove on again, and 3 fire trucks roared toward the convent. Then, as they approached the perimeter, the same inexplicable compulsion seized the firefighters. Voices crackled over the radio with absurd excuses. "Sir, I just remembered the truck hasn't been inspected this month. My wife says I must be home on time tonight or she'll divorce me. I'm about to retire, sir. I refuse to take on something this risky. My shoe's pinching. Something's rubbing my foot. I need to go back and change it. I must go back for my badge, sir. I can't deploy without it." The chief of police found sweat running down his back. If one officer suddenly disobeyed orders could be an accident, dozens doing so with ridiculous pretexts could not. Just as his thoughts spiraled, his secretary ran up holding a phone. "Chief, the president is on line 1. The chief straightened and took the call. After a brief conversation, he gave new orders. "Everyone pull back. Set up a cordon outside and stop anyone from entering. Including the firefighters?" A deputy demanded. "Someone from the fire department will advise them. No one will try to enter." "But what do we tell the public?" another deputy protested. "They'll never accept inaction." "Announce it now. Say we preliminarily determined the cause," the chief said, forcing a breath. "Say it was an accidental gas pipeline explosion." "There's no gas pipeline there at all," the deputy snapped, grabbing the chief's uniform in righteous fury. "Who called you? Who is involved in this explosion that makes you order such nonsense? If there's no gas pipeline, say it was an oil line or a natural gas main," the chief spat back. "If you're so dissatisfied, take anyone willing and go in. If you can, I won't stop you." "Have the Muggle cops given up trying to get in?" "They were contacted by the minister through their president. The Muggle police have set up a cordon and are keeping the civilians back." At the ground zero of the explosion, where the convent had been reduced to ruins, almost all the Aurors of the French ministry had gathered. Gerard herself was personally directing the operation. What exactly were they trying to do? Yuma muttered at Gerard's side, staring in disbelief at the devastation. Who could survive that? They weren't trying to capture squibs. If they wanted prisoners, why cause so much damage? "We should be grateful there weren't more Muggles living nearby," Gerard said grimly, though she kept her composure in front of the Aurors. "Prepare to extinguish the fire. Be ready to confront the enemy at any time and rescue any survivors." Aurors on broomsticks were first to approach the blaze. Using summoning charms in midair, they pulled water from the Seine and doused the inferno with astonishing speed. Ground teams then converged on the crater that had once been the convent. Suddenly, from the waterlogged soil at the pit's center, a pale hand thrust upward. An Auror had his ankle seized by something emerging from the earth. He screamed as half his body was dragged under. More hands tore through the mud. Pale, slimy bodies, like water-bloated corpses, crawled out of the pit. "Inferi! It's Inferi!" an Auror shouted. A sickly green light flared from the center of the crater. Against Paris's night sky, the shape of a skull with a snake's tongue, the dark mark, loomed as if mocking the Aurors fighting the Inferi. "They're Death Eaters," someone hissed. "So arrogant, too rampant." Gerard trembled, not from fear, but from a mix of anger, relief, and a fierce, unexpected excitement. Yuma watched, baffled. What could make her react like this? How could the appearance of the dark mark ease her stomach? Had the deaths and destruction been less real to her because the perpetrators were Death Eaters? But Gerard's reaction had reasoning behind it, and it was not what Yuma expected. The Death Eaters were despicable filth, but their main base of operations was Britain. Their terror had been a more recent and localized blot on the wizarding world. The figures in the photo Gerard had seen, the ones Severus had shown her, and she had compared in the minister's office safe, were different. Those people had once swept across all of Europe. Their master had nearly become the leader of half of Europe's wizards. Their reign had left deep psychological scars on generations of witches and wizards, far worse than the current Death Eaters. Seeing the dark mark meant this was at least the familiar enemy. It meant the old nightmare in the photo might not have returned. Gerard's knot of dread, which had been tightening since she'd examined that photo that afternoon, loosened at once. Relieved that the culprits were the known Death Eaters rather than whatever horror she had feared, Gerard ordered containment of the Inferi and dispatched every available Auror to pursue and capture whoever was responsible for the carnage. Back at the French ministry, alarms had put the whole place on lockdown. Ordinary staff were sent home. The black cats that rounded the ministry's edges slipped into their early watches, guarding every inch. Severus was not there. After the ugly events of that afternoon, Lupin had no reason to join the Auror operation. He stayed to watch over Draco and Harry in their bedroom. Harry paced and demanded to know where Severus had gone. "Don't worry," Lupin said. "He went back to Hogwarts to confirm some things with Dumbledore. He'll be perfectly safe there." Just after Lupin had calmed them, Mary, pale and eyes rimmed red, knocked and came in carrying 2 boxes of cookies. "These are from Patrick. He wanted to thank you," she said, setting the boxes down. Then she hesitated, fear and unease written across her face as if weighing whether to speak. Lupin noticed immediately. "What is it?" "I don't know what's wrong with Patrick. I should trust him. He told me to deliver these and then to find excuses to stay with you, said being here would be safe." Mary's voice broke and tears trembled on her lashes. She looked at Lupin and the others with panicked urgency. She had a premonition that if she wanted to protect her husband, she had to speak. "I guessed he was going to do something dangerous. I cried and begged him not to go, but he said if he didn't go, we wouldn't have a future." Lupin felt his breath stop. He sensed a conspiracy, a plot against the French Ministry of Magic that had been in motion well before Nicolas Flamel's abduction. Rosier's fractured mind, apparently wrecked by memory charms and confundus, now seemed possibly a deliberate masquerade. Those memory charms might not have been forced on him. They might have been prepared ahead of time with certain accomplices to evade ministry scrutiny. To set that up, Rosier could have made irreversible sacrifices. The implication was chilling. 140. "Don't be afraid, Draco. Can you tell roughly when he started to change?" Lupin asked Mary. Mary forced herself to calm down. She knew she couldn't afford to lose control. The more upset she was, the harder it would be to explain anything clearly. "It must have been this morning. The Aurors took us to identify a flashlight. It was the first gift Patrick ever gave me. They said it had been taken and sold by those murderers." "A flashlight? Did he touch it?" Lupin pressed. She shivered. "He switched it on, and the light hit him. I know him better than anyone. At that moment, I could tell he was a bit off. At the time, I thought he was just worried about home," she went on. "The Aurors told us they'd thrown everything out of our house. If no one looks after things, even if we could go back, we might not be able to live there. Both of us have been dragged into this for so long. Even if it's over eventually, we haven't been back to work in ages. Who knows if our jobs are still there?" Her voice broke. "I thought he was worried about that, so I didn't think he was in danger." Tears started again. Mary covered her face and began to sob so quietly it was almost a strangled sound. Draco, sitting nearby, looked awkward and uneasy. He felt a reflexive revulsion toward Muggles, as he'd been taught, but seeing a human woman collapse into sobs unsettled him all the same. After a long hesitation, he dug 2 tissues out of his pocket and handed them to her, then, with an almost comical expression of disgust, produced 2 more to wipe his own hands. "When he let you go, did he say anything else?" Lupin asked, watching her carefully. "He shoved 2 boxes of biscuits into my arms, kissed me, and told me," Mary hiccuped, "that no matter what, he would always love me and never betray me. I knew something was wrong. I asked him what was happening, but he wouldn't tell me anything. He just said to come and find you. He said if I stayed with you, I'd be safe. I asked him what he planned to do, if he was hiding anything from me." She gripped the chair. "He grabbed my hand and he said fate had brought us into this, but he wouldn't give in to fate. He said he'd protect me, that he wouldn't let me be harmed, that our house and our future wouldn't be taken away. Then he left. The Aurors were gone, and nothing held him back. I watched him run out of the corridor." Silence fell over the room. Even Draco didn't mutter any of his usual sneers. Harry broke the quiet first. "Patrick must have been forced to do something. Now that the Aurors from the Ministry are outside, those people have set him up. They're using him." Lupin's face tightened. He'd already suspected as much. The Ministry's checks on Rosier had shown his memory issues were genuine. Before the flashlight, his behavior had been consistent. When the Aurors removed the memory charms they could lift, they had glimpsed memories that didn't betray anything sinister. No one, neither the French Ministry, nor Severus, nor Lupin, had any reason to doubt Patrick's innocence then. The flashlight had to be the problem. It might have restored certain memories in a warped way, or it might have changed his mind by other means. Through his words before the light hit him, Harry and Lupin could see Patrick was not a bad man. Harry's voice was hard. "We have to save him." Draco stared at them in disbelief. "What are you saying? Are you so sure he wasn't doing it on purpose?" Maybe he's been in league with those murderers all along. He lied to his wife about being a squib. Why not lie now? Lupin said nothing, only looked at Harry. In his gaze, the younger man, brave, stubborn, full of the same fierce moral certainty they'd known as students, was alive again. Lupin felt the weight of time. Their old friends were dead or imprisoned, and he was the only one left to wander. And yet Harry, the child who grew out of those days, had learned his principles from Severus Snape, the man they had once despised, and now invoked him as example. Lupin's throat tightened. "You're right," he said at last, an apology in his tone. "If Professor Snape were here, he'd agree to go." Harry nodded. Just like when he caught Sanguini and Volpe, he didn't hesitate to help them, even if it made him hated. He knew it was the right thing. Lupin took a breath. "It will be dangerous. Severus isn't here, with only me to look after you two." "You have to stay," he said unexpectedly, grabbing Draco's arm. "Stay here and take care of Mrs. Rosier." Draco balked. "Me? Are you mistaken? I'm only 9. She's an adult." "Look at her," Lupin said, nodding toward Mary. Draco did, and for the first time saw how pale she had become. She was sweating, slumped in the chair, breathing shallowly. Something's wrong with her. It could be an underlying condition, or those murderers are using her to threaten Patrick. In any case, someone must be here to care for her. Lupin rifled through his suitcase and brought out a dozen vials. He handed Draco a milky white bottle. "The Ministry has sealed everything. We can't reach anyone. Floors blocked, fireplaces cut off, and apparitions not available. We must rely on ourselves." "This is a general healing potion," Lupin instructed. "It's concentrated. Dilute it in 200 milliliters of hot water, let it cool until it's just warm, then have her drink it." Draco fumbled with the bottle, panic written over his face. No matter what you think of Muggles, she's a person in front of you," Lupin said quietly. "You won't stand by and watch her suffer." Draco hesitated, torn. Why would he care about a Muggle? But when he looked at Mary, so small and fragile in the chair, sweating and pale, he couldn't find the words to refuse. "If she doesn't get better," he whispered. "Do what you can," Lupin said. "That's all any of us can do." Lupin gave him a steady look, then drew his wand. Harry also reached into his satchel and took out the birch wand Severus had given him. He set it in his hand, and rare softness in his voice said, "Don't be afraid, Draco. We'll be back soon." Draco bristled, suddenly defiant. "Who are you calling afraid? I'm not afraid. I'm only taking care of this lowly, weak Muggle. Of course I'm not afraid."